Hello everyone and welcome. This is Harry Reality Bender speaking. We have handpicked a wonderful story for today. What if Harry Potter used necromancy to bring back the Marauders at age 6? New videos drop regularly, so subscribe and hit the bell to stay updated. And don't forget to like if you enjoy the story. Shall we begin? Here goes. Chapter 1, The Book of Whispers. The cupboard under the stairs was quiet save for the soft, steady breathing of its sole occupant. 6-year-old Harry Potter lay on his thin mattress, green eyes staring up at the slanted ceiling where spiders crawled in lazy patterns. Outside, an October wind rattled the windows of number 4, Privet Drive, but inside his cupboard, Harry felt oddly disconnected from it all. 3 weeks had passed since his cousin Dudley had received a new bicycle for no particular reason at all. 3 weeks since Aunt Petunia had taken Dudley shopping for winter clothes while Harry stayed with Mrs. Fig and her cats. 3 weeks since he'd asked, in a moment of foolish courage, when his parents might come to visit him. "Your parents are dead, boy," Uncle Vernon had said, his mustache quivering with irritation. Car crash. And don't ask questions. Dead. The word had lodged itself in Harry's mind, taking root and spreading like the vines that sometimes grew through the cracks in Mrs. Fig's garden wall. He'd known, of course, the Dursleys had never hidden that his parents weren't coming back. But something about the finality of that word, dead, had changed things. Harry rolled onto his side as the heating vent kicked on, sending a warm draft across the floor of his cupboard. His eyes felt heavy. School had been particularly difficult that day. His teacher, Mrs. Pembroke, had asked everyone to draw their families for parents' evening displays. Harry had sat with his crayon hovering over the blank page, unsure what to draw. In the end, he'd sketched himself, small and alone in the corner of the paper. Sleep came to him like it always did, suddenly and without ceremony. But tonight was different. Tonight, his dreams had teeth. He dreamed of a stag, proud and tall, running through a forest at night. He dreamed of a large black dog, its bark like laughter. He dreamed of a wolf, howling at a moon that seemed too close, too bright. And lastly, he dreamed of a rat, scurrying through shadows, watching with beady eyes. The animals circled a book, ancient and bound in what looked like dark leather. Its pages flipped of their own accord, revealing symbols that Harry couldn't understand but somehow recognized. In his dream, the book called to him, a whisper that felt like his own name. Harry. The voice was neither male nor female, young nor old. Find me. Harry bolted upright, nearly hitting his head on the sloped ceiling. His thin pajamas clung to his skin, damp with sweat. The cupboard felt smaller than usual, the darkness thicker. He fumbled for his glasses, sliding them onto his face with shaking hands. Something had changed in the house. He could feel it, a shift in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. The feeling pulled him toward his cupboard door, and for once, he found it unlocked. The Dursleys must have forgotten to slide the bolt into place. The hallway was silent and dark. Harry could hear Uncle Vernon's thunderous snores from upstairs, accompanied by Aunt Petunia's softer breathing. He paused at the bottom of the staircase, one small hand on the banister. Every instinct told him to return to his cupboard, to curl up and forget the strange dream. But the whisper came again, sliding through the house like a current. Find me, Harry Potter. His bare feet made no sound on the carpeted stairs. The old steps creaked, but somehow not under Harry's weight. It was as if the house itself was helping him remain undetected. On the landing, Harry paused. The voice seemed to come from above now, beyond the second floor where the bedrooms were. His eyes drifted to the ceiling, where a small cord dangled, the pull for the attic door. Harry had never been allowed in the attic. Nothing up there for little boys, Aunt Petunia had snapped when he'd asked about it once. Now, he reached for the cord, standing on his tiptoes. His fingers brushed it once, twice, before catching hold. The door swung down with surprising ease, a wooden ladder unfolding toward him. The attic was stifling, thick with dust that danced in the moonlight streaming through a small circular window. Boxes were stacked in neat rows, Dursley family Christmas decorations, old clothes, and toys that Dudley had broken or outgrown. Harry moved between them cautiously, guided by instinct and the persistent whisper that grew stronger with each step. "Here." The voice breathed. "I'm here." In the farthest corner, beneath a stack of yellowing newspapers, sat a trunk that didn't match the Dursleys' other possessions. It was old, made of dark wood with brass fittings tarnished by time. Ellie was branded into the lid. Harry knelt before it, his heart racing. The lock looked sturdy, impossible to open without a key, yet when he touched it, he felt a strange warmth spread from his fingertips. The lock clicked open on its own. Inside, he found what remained of Lily Evans' life before marriage. A Hogwarts acceptance letter. A wand in a velvet-lined box. Photographs of people who moved and waved. A prefect badge. And beneath it all, wrapped in black velvet, a book. The book from his dreams. Harry's small hands trembled as he lifted it. The cover was bound in what he now realized wasn't leather at all, but something older, darker. The symbols etched into it seemed to shift as he looked at them, rearranging themselves until he could almost understand their meaning. "The Veil Between," he whispered, reading the title that had somehow transformed into English before his eyes. He shouldn't open it. Something deep inside warned him against it. But another part, the part that lay awake at night wondering what his mother's voice had sounded like, the part that ached when he saw other children with their parents, that part reached for the cover and pulled it open. The book was written in a language Harry had never seen, yet as his fingers traced the lines of text, understanding bloomed in his mind. It was a book about death, and more importantly, about how death might be undone. "Not gone," Harry murmured, reading a passage that seemed to glow beneath his touch. "Just beyond the veil." The attic felt suddenly colder. Outside, clouds shifted across the moon, casting the room into deeper shadow. Harry should have been afraid, but instead, he felt something he rarely experienced: hope. "I could bring them back," he whispered to the empty attic. "I could have a family." The book seemed to pulse in his hands, as if in agreement. Harry carefully wrapped it back in the velvet cloth and tucked it under his arm. The trunk closed with the same soft click with which it had opened, the lock securing itself once more. He descended the ladder carefully, pulling the attic door closed behind him. The house remained silent as he made his way back to his cupboard, the book clutched to his chest like a shield. That night, Harry dreamed of his parents for the first time he could remember. Not just shadowy figures or the green flash that sometimes haunted his sleep, but their faces, his father's untidy hair so like his own, his mother's kind green eyes. They were reaching for him across a misty divide, their lips forming words he couldn't quite hear. When he woke, the book lay beside him, open to a page he hadn't seen before. At the top, in flowing script, was a single word: Samhain. October slipped away with unusual speed. During the days, Harry attended school, endured Dudley's taunts, and completed his endless list of chores. But at night, in the secrecy of his cupboard, he studied the book that had called to him. The more he read, the more he understood. Samhain, Halloween to the Dursleys, was when the veil between life and death grew thin. The book described rituals for speaking to the dead, for glimpsing the other side, and finally, for bringing souls back across the boundary. That ritual required power, timing, and blood freely given. Harry didn't fully understand it all, but he understood enough. This Halloween, the moon would be in the perfect position. This Halloween, he could try to bring his parents home. He began gathering what he needed, stealing moments alone to collect items for the ritual. Aunt Petunia's silver sewing needle. A candle from the emergency kit in the kitchen. Salt from the pantry. He took only tiny amounts, things that wouldn't be missed. The most difficult item was a personal possession from those he wished to recall. The book was specific about this, something that had meant something to them in life. Harry had nothing of his parents except the clothes he'd been wearing when he was left on the Dursleys' doorstep, long since discarded or cut up for rags. But then he remembered the trunk in the attic. His mother's school things. Surely something there would work. 3 days before Halloween, Harry snuck back into the attic while the Dursleys watched television downstairs. The trunk opened for him as easily as it had before. This time, he dug deeper, past the school mementos, searching for something personal. His fingers closed around a small velvet pouch. Inside was a man's watch with a cracked face and a delicate silver charm bracelet with 3 charms, a stag, a dog, and a wolf. Perfect, Harry whispered, slipping both items into his pocket. The final piece was to find a place to perform the ritual. It needed to be outside, under the moon, somewhere the Dursleys wouldn't see him. The shed in the back garden would work, he decided. Uncle Vernon never went there after dark. On Halloween, Harry was tense with anticipation. The Dursleys noticed nothing unusual, too focused on preparing Dudley for an evening of trick-or-treating. Aunt Petunia had spent hours creating a pirate costume, complete with a papier-mâché parrot for Dudley's shoulder. "You're to stay in your cupboard," Uncle Vernon informed Harry as they prepared to leave. "Mrs. Figg couldn't take you tonight. Don't touch anything, and don't make a sound." "Yes, Uncle Vernon," Harry replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. As soon as their car pulled out of the driveway, Harry sprang into action. He retrieved the book and his gathered supplies from their hiding place beneath the loose floorboard in his cupboard. The watch and bracelet went into his pocket. With careful steps, he made his way through the dark house and out the back door. The night was unusually warm for late October, the air thick with anticipation. Above, the moon hung low and full, casting long shadows across the Dursleys' immaculate lawn. Harry crept to the garden shed and slipped inside. The space was small and smelled of fertilizer and grass clippings. Harry cleared a space in the center of the dirt floor, using a stick to draw the symbols from the book, a circle within a triangle within a square. At each point of the triangle, he placed a small mound of salt. Next came the candle, set at the center of the circle. His hands trembled as he struck a match, the small flame flickering in the still air of the shed. He lit the candle, watching as shadows danced across the walls. "I should be afraid," Harry said to himself, his voice small in the darkness. "But I'm not." It was true. Despite everything the book had warned about the dangers of disturbing the dead, Harry felt only certainty. This was right. This was what he was meant to do. He placed the watch and bracelet in the circle, positioning them carefully according to the book's instructions. Then, taking a deep breath, he pricked his finger with the needle. "Blood freely given," he whispered, allowing 3 drops to fall onto each item. The candle flame jumped, turning a deep, unnatural blue. Harry felt the air pressure change, his ears popping as if he'd climbed a very tall mountain. Outside, the wind picked up suddenly, rattling the shed door. Harry opened the book to the marked page and began to read. The words weren't English, weren't any language he'd ever heard, yet they flowed from his mouth as naturally as breath. "Aprite velum," he chanted, his child's voice somehow deeper, resonating in the small space. "Redite ad me. Sanguine meo, vocate vas. Per lunam plenum, aprite viam." The candle flame stretched upward, impossibly tall, nearly touching the roof of the shed. The temperature plummeted, frost spreading across the dirt floor in crystalline patterns. Harry's breath fogged before him, but he didn't stop reading. "James Potter," he called into the growing cold. "Lily Potter. I call you through the veil. Return to me." The watch and bracelet began to vibrate, lifting slightly off the ground. Harry felt something tear inside him, a wrenching sensation that made him gasp. Magic, his magic, was pouring out of him, feeding the ritual. But something was wrong. The book had mentioned nothing about pain, yet Harry's chest burned as if he'd swallowed fire. The blue flame turned black, sending shadows crawling up the walls like living things. The ground beneath the circle began to crack, dark energy pulsing through the fissures. "James Potter," Harry gasped again, fighting through the pain. Lily Potter. The bracelet shattered, silver shards exploding outward. But instead of falling to the ground, they hung in the air, suspended in the swirling energy. The watch followed, glass and gears separating, expanding to form a framework of light. 4 distinct points of light appeared within the circle, one gold, one silver, one amber, and one a murky brown. They spun around each other, faster and faster, drawing power from Harry until he felt hollow, emptied. "Come back," Harry pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please come back." The black flame erupted, consuming the candle entirely. For a moment, complete darkness engulfed the shed. Then came the sound, like tearing fabric, but impossibly vast, as if the sky itself were being ripped open. Light exploded outward, blinding Harry. He fell backward, his head striking the wall of the shed. Through watering eyes, he saw 4 distinct shapes forming in the circle, human shapes, solid and real. "What in Merlin's name?" a man's voice said, sounding confused and alarmed. "James. James." Another voice, higher with panic. "Impossible," came a third voice, hoarse and disbelieving. A fourth voice simply whimpered. As Harry's vision cleared, he saw them, 4 men standing within the circle he had drawn. The first was tall with untidy black hair and glasses, staring at his hands as if he'd never seen them before. Beside him was a handsome man with long dark hair, turning in a circle with a look of wild confusion. The third was thinner, with light brown hair streaked prematurely with gray, his amber eyes wide with shock. The last was short and plump, cowering slightly as if expecting to be struck. "Dad?" Harry whispered, his voice barely audible. All 4 men turned to look at him. The one with glasses, James Potter, took a stumbling step forward, then froze. "Harry," he breathed, disbelief etched into every line of his face. "But you're just a baby." Harry tried to stand but found he couldn't. The ritual had drained him completely. "Not anymore," he managed to say. "I'm 6. 6. James repeated, looking to the others in confusion. "But that would mean, how long have we been?" 5 years, said the man with amber eyes, his voice hollow. "We've been gone 5 years, James." The handsome man with long hair dropped to his knees, staring at Harry with a mixture of awe and horror. "Did you do this, pup? Did you bring us back?" Harry nodded weakly. "From the book. I found it in the attic. It called to me." The 4 men exchanged glances loaded with unspoken meaning. James moved toward Harry cautiously, as if afraid he might vanish. "What book, Harry?" he asked gently. Harry pointed to where the veil between lay open on the ground, its pages now glowing with an eerie light. James picked it up, his face paling as he read the title. "Necromancy," he whispered. "My son is performing necromancy." "Bloody hell," said the handsome man, running a hand through his long hair. "That's supposed to be impossible, even for trained wizards." "Clearly not," said the gray-streaked man, gesturing at themselves. "We're here, aren't we?" "Solid, conscious, alive?" asked the short, plump man, his voice squeaking slightly. A heavy silence fell. Harry looked from one man to another, confusion cutting through his exhaustion. "You're not my mum," he said finally, disappointment crashing over him. "I tried to bring back my parents." James knelt beside Harry, his eyes, so like Harry's own, filled with a complex mixture of emotions. "I'm your father, Harry. James Potter. These are my friends, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. We were known as the Marauders at school." "But where's my mum?" Harry asked, tears welling in his eyes. James swallowed hard, placing a gentle hand on Harry's shoulder. "I don't know, son. The magic you used, it's very old, very dangerous. It might have latched onto the objects you used." He glanced at the scattered silver shards. "That was Sirius's gift to your mother, wasn't it, Padfoot? The charm bracelet with our animagus forms?" Sirius nodded solemnly. And that was your watch, Prongs. The one your father gave you when you turned 17. The ritual connected to us through those items, Remus said softly. Not to Lily. Harry's tears spilled over, tracking down his thin cheeks. I just wanted my family back. I just wanted, his words dissolved into quiet sobs. James hesitated only a moment before pulling Harry into his arms. I know, son. I know. For a long moment, the shed was silent except for Harry's muffled crying. Then, from the house, came the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Headlights swept across the garden, briefly illuminating the interior of the shed through its small window. The Dursleys, Harry gasped, pulling back from his father's embrace. They're home early. Dursleys? James repeated, his brow furrowing. Petunia and her walrus husband. You live with them? Before Harry could answer, the back door of the house opened. Light spilled across the lawn as Vernon Dursley's bulky silhouette appeared, calling out Harry's name with growing anger. Boy! Where are you? I know you've left your cupboard. Cupboard? Sirius growled, his handsome face darkening. What does he mean, cupboard? Harry shrank back, suddenly afraid, not of his father or his friends, but of what would happen when they learned how the Dursleys had treated him. It's where I sleep, he admitted quietly. The cupboard under the stairs. James's expression hardened into something dangerous. He stood, pulling Harry gently to his feet. Stay behind me, he said, his voice low and controlled. Padfoot, Moony, right behind you, Prongs, Sirius said, his eyes flashing with barely contained fury. Peter, stay here and watch the book, Remus instructed, his tone brooking no argument. We'll deal with you later. The plump man nodded, shrinking back against the wall of the shed. Harry noticed the others treated him differently, with a coldness they didn't show each other. Before he could question it, James was leading him out of the shed and across the lawn toward the house. Vernon Dursley stopped short at the sight of them, his face rapidly cycling through confusion, shock, and fear. Who the bloody hell are you? He bellowed, though Harry noticed his voice quavered slightly. How dare you trespass? Hello, Dursley, James said, his voice dangerously soft. Remember me? James Potter. Lily's husband. Harry's father. Vernon's face went from red to white in an instant. You're dead. James supplied, taking another step forward. I was. I'm feeling much better now. Petunia appeared in the doorway behind her husband, Dudley half hidden behind her skirt. She took one look at James and the men behind him and let out a strangled scream. It's not possible, she whispered, her bony hand clutching at her throat. You died. Both of you died. And yet here I stand, James replied coldly. On your doorstep, discovering that you've been keeping my son in a cupboard. Vernon seemed to recover some of his bluster. Now see here, he began, drawing himself up to his full height. We took the boy in out of the goodness of our hearts. Clothed him, fed him, barely, Harry murmured, finding unexpected courage with his father beside him. Sirius stepped forward, and there was something in his bearing, a dangerous grace, that made Vernon take an involuntary step backward. Why don't we continue this discussion inside? Unless you'd like your neighbors to hear all about how you've been treating your orphan nephew. Vernon glanced nervously at the surrounding houses, where lights were beginning to come on as the commotion drew attention. Fine, he grunted, turning to lead the way inside. But I want answers. You can't just show up here, claiming to be dead people. We're not claiming anything, Remus said quietly. We are who we say we are. And we have questions of our own. As they entered the house, Harry felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. The magical exhaustion from the ritual was catching up to him. James noticed immediately, scooping Harry into his arms as if he weighed nothing. Easy there, son, he murmured, concern evident in his voice. You've done very powerful magic tonight. Your body needs rest. Harry relaxed against his father's chest, marveling at how right it felt, how safe. For the first time in his memory, he felt protected. The Dursleys led them into the living room, Petunia frantically straightening cushions while shooting terrified glances at the wizards in her perfectly normal home. Dudley, confused by the tension, retreated to the corner with his Halloween candy clutched protectively to his chest. "First things first," James said, taking a seat on the couch with Harry still in his arms. "Show me this cupboard." Vernon and Petunia exchanged panicked looks. "Now, see here," Vernon began, but Sirius cut him off. "The cupboard. Now." There was something in his voice that brooked no argument. Vernon grudgingly led them to the hallway, pointing at the small door under the stairs. James, still carrying Harry, knelt to look inside. His face went very still when he saw the small, dirty mattress, the collection of broken soldiers lined up carefully on a shelf, the crude drawing of a family taped to the wall. "You kept my son in here," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Like an animal." "We didn't have room," Petunia began. "You have 4 bedrooms in this house," Remus observed, looking up the stairs. "One for you two, one for your son, a guest room, and what appears to be a room full of broken toys. You had room." James stood slowly, turning to face the Dursleys. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with a terrible anger. "If I weren't so concerned with setting a good example for my son right now, I would hex you both into next week." Harry, despite his exhaustion, felt a warm glow at being called "my son" in that protective tone. "The boy is strange," Vernon said defensively. "Does unnatural things. Just like his mother." He stopped abruptly as both James and Sirius drew wands from seemingly nowhere. Harry blinked in surprise. They hadn't had wands in the shed, had they? "Choose your next words very carefully," Sirius advised, his wand pointed directly at Vernon's heart. "That's my godson you're talking about." The tension in the hallway was broken by a crash from the back garden, followed by Peter's panicked voice calling for help. James handed Harry to Remus, who took him with gentle care. "Stay here with Harry," James instructed. "Sirius, with me." They hurried out the back door, leaving Remus to face the Dursleys alone. He seemed more than capable, fixing them with a stern gaze that made even Vernon step back. "While they investigate that," Remus said calmly, "why don't you explain why Albus Dumbledore's protection wards around this house are so weak I can barely sense them?" Petunia's eyes widened. "Wards? That awful man never mentioned wards. Just said we had to take the boy, that it was our duty, and you thought that duty meant neglect and cruelty?" Remus asked, his voice dangerously soft. He looked down at Harry, his expression gentling. "Has it always been like this, cub?" Harry nodded slowly. "For as long as I can remember." "They don't like magic." "Magic?" Dudley piped up from the doorway, his eyes huge in his round face. "There's no such thing as magic." "Dad says, your father is wrong," Remus said simply. He shifted Harry to one arm and drew a wand with his free hand. With a casual flick, he transformed the hallway rug into a flock of butterflies that swirled around Dudley's head before returning to their original form. Dudley's mouth fell open. Petunia gave a strangled cry and pulled him away, as if magic might be contagious. "Now," Remus continued pleasantly, "I suggest you all sit down and consider very carefully how much worse your lives will become if you don't cooperate fully with us from this point forward." Harry felt his eyelids growing heavier. The events of the night, combined with the magical drain, were overwhelming him. He let his head rest against Remus's shoulder, feeling oddly safe with this quiet man who looked at him with such kindness. "Rest, Harry," Remus murmured, shifting to hold him more securely. "Your dad will be back soon." His dad. The word sent a thrill through Harry's tired body. He'd done it. Not exactly as he'd planned, his mother was still beyond reach, but he'd brought his father back from death itself. As consciousness slipped away, Harry wondered dimly what consequences would follow such powerful magic. Outside, in the darkness beyond the garden, a figure watched the house with keen interest. Mortimer Blackthorne, his ancient face lined with centuries of dark magic, felt the disturbance in the fabric of death like a physical blow. Someone had torn the veil, not just glimpsed beyond it, but ripped it open and pulled souls back through. Someone young, untrained, with raw power that made even Blackthorne's considerable talent seem paltry by comparison. Fascinating, he whispered, his voice like dry leaves rustling. Most fascinating indeed. He turned away, vanishing into the shadows. The boy would need time to recover, and Blackthorne would need time to prepare. Whatever had happened tonight had set events in motion that could not be undone. Death had been cheated, and death always collected its due. Inside the house, Harry Potter slept in the arms of a man who had died to protect him, brought back by love and desperation and magic too ancient to be fully understood. Whatever tomorrow would bring, tonight he was no longer alone. James and Sirius returned from the garden with grim expressions, Peter shuffling nervously between them. The book was clutched in James's hand, now closed and wrapped in the velvet cloth Harry had found it in. The ritual site is unstable, James reported quietly to Remus, glancing at the sleeping Harry. Something came through after us, or started to. Peter managed to disrupt the connection, but not before, he broke off, looking troubled. Before what? Remus prompted. Before it spoke to me, James said, his voice barely above a whisper. It knew me, Moony. Knew all of us. Said we've upset the balance, and there will be a price. What kind of price? Remus asked, unconsciously tightening his hold on Harry. It didn't say, Sirius answered, running a hand through his hair. But I think we all know how death magic works. Nothing comes without sacrifice. Vernon Dursley, who had been watching this exchange with mounting confusion and fear, finally found his voice. What are you people talking about? What's happening here? James turned to him, his expression hardening. What's happening, Dursley, is that you and your wife are going to go upstairs, pack some bags, and take your son on an extended holiday. Somewhere far away. How dare you, Vernon began, but James cut him off. I dare because my son has done something incredibly powerful and potentially dangerous tonight. This house is no longer safe for any of us, but especially not for non-magical people. Unless you want to be around when whatever came partway through that veil returns to finish the job. Petunia went pale. What is he talking about, Vernon? Ghosts, demons, perhaps worse, Sirius said casually, examining his fingernails. Hard to say with necromantic rituals. So unpredictable. That was all it took. Within 20 minutes, the Dursleys were packing suitcases, Petunia muttering about visiting her cousin in Majorca. Dudley, confused and frightened, kept asking questions that went unanswered as his parents threw clothing haphazardly into bags. In the living room, the Marauders gathered to discuss their situation. Harry slept on, curled on the couch with James's jacket draped over him like a blanket. We need to understand exactly what happened, Remus was saying, his practical nature asserting itself. The magic Harry used, it shouldn't have been possible, especially not for a 6-year-old wizard with no training. It's the book, James said, placing the veil between on the coffee table with evident distaste. Lily mentioned something like this once, grimoires that can teach the reader, that adjust their contents to the reader's understanding. They're incredibly rare and usually heavily restricted by ministries worldwide. Where would Petunia Dursley get a book of necromancy? Sirius asked incredulously. The woman thinks magic is a contagious disease. It was in my mother's school trunk, Harry's small voice said from the couch. He was awake, blinking owlishly without his glasses. In the attic. It called to me in my dreams. James immediately moved to sit beside him, gently placing Harry's glasses on his face. How are you feeling, son? Tired, Harry admitted. But better. He looked around at the 4 men, his expression uncertain. You're really my dad. And his friends? We really are, James confirmed softly. Though we have a lot to figure out about how and why we're here. Harry's gaze shifted to Peter, who was hovering nervously by the door. Why do you all look at him differently? Like you're angry with him? A tense silence fell. The three other Marauders exchanged loaded glances. That's a complicated story, Harry, Sirius finally said. One we'll need to discuss, but perhaps not tonight. Harry seemed to accept this, though his curious gaze lingered on Peter for a moment longer. Then he turned back to James. Will you have to go away again? Back to, where you were? James's throat worked visibly as he struggled with how to answer. I don't know, he admitted finally. This kind of magic, it's not supposed to be permanent. But I promise you, Harry, for as long as I'm here, I'm going to take care of you. We all are. Harry nodded solemnly. I read in the book that there might be a way to make it permanent. A binding ritual, but it needs, Harry, James interrupted gently but firmly. That book is very dangerous. The magic in it comes at a terrible cost, one I don't want you paying. But, your father's right, pup, Sirius said, coming to sit on Harry's other side. Necromancy isn't just forbidden because wizards are stuffy rule followers. It's forbidden because it damages both the caster and the natural order. We need to be very careful about our next steps. Harry's face fell, but he nodded reluctantly. I understand. I just don't want to be alone again. The raw vulnerability in his voice broke something in James. He pulled Harry into a tight embrace, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. You won't be, son. Whatever happens, you won't be alone again. The sound of the Dursleys' car starting broke the emotional moment. Outside, Vernon was loading the last of their luggage into the boot, his movements hurried and anxious. Good riddance, Sirius muttered, watching through the window as the car backed out of the driveway. Though I'm not sure running away is their best option. It's better for Harry if they're not here, Remus pointed out. Less complicated, at least until we figure out our next steps. Which are what, exactly? Peter spoke up for the first time since returning to the house. We're dead men, or at least we were. We have no wands, he gestured at the conjured wands the others had been using, no money, no legal existence. We have magic, James countered, his arms still around Harry's shoulders. And we have each other. For tonight, that's enough. Tomorrow, we contact Dumbledore. Dumbledore? Harry repeated, the name unfamiliar on his tongue. The headmaster of Hogwarts, Remus explained. The school where we all learned magic, and where you'll go when you turn 11. He's also the leader of the Order of the Phoenix, the group that fought against Voldemort during the war. Voldemort, Harry said slowly. The man who killed my parents. Who gave me this? He touched the lightning bolt scar on his forehead. The four men stared at him in shock. You know about Voldemort? James asked. Harry shook his head. Not really. Uncle Vernon just said you died in a car crash. But sometimes I dream about a green light and a high, cold laugh. And my scar hurts when I have those dreams. James and Sirius exchanged troubled glances. Remus's brow furrowed in deep thought. That's concerning, he said carefully. Curse scars can have unusual properties, but pain years after the event suggests an active connection. All the more reason to contact Dumbledore, James said decisively. But first, we all need rest. It's been a long night, and Harry's magical core needs time to recover. As if to punctuate his point, Harry yawned widely, his small body sagging with exhaustion despite his brief nap. James smiled fondly and stood, lifting Harry easily into his arms. Let's find you a proper bed, son. I think your cousin's room might be just right. Harry's eyes widened. I can sleep in Dudley's room. You can have Dudley's room, James corrected. From now on. Though we may need to redecorate a bit. Harry rested his head on his father's shoulder, a small smile playing at his lips. "I'd like that." As James carried Harry upstairs, Sirius turned to Remus and Peter with a serious expression. "We need to talk about the elephant in the room." Peter flinched, shrinking back against the wall. "Sirius, please, not now," Remus interrupted, his voice firm. "Tonight we focus on Harry and understanding what's happened to us. Tomorrow we deal with everything else." Sirius looked like he wanted to argue but finally nodded in agreement. "Fine. But I'm watching you, Wormtail. One wrong move." He left the threat hanging in the air as he followed James upstairs. Peter slumped into an armchair, his face ashen. "He's right to hate me," he whispered. "Probably," Remus agreed, his tone neutral. "But Harry's magic brought you back along with us, and that means you're part of this now. Whatever this is." Upstairs, James tucked Harry into Dudley's bed, which was far too large for his small frame. The room was cluttered with broken toys and games, evidence of a child who had never known want or restriction. "Tomorrow we'll make this room yours properly," James promised, smoothing Harry's unruly hair back from his forehead. "With things you actually like." Harry nodded sleepily, his eyes already drifting closed. "Dad," he murmured, the word still new and wonderful on his tongue. "I'm sorry I couldn't bring Mum back too." James swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. "Don't be sorry, Harry. What you did was incredible. Dangerous and terrifying, yes, but incredible. Your mother would be so proud of your magic, even while she lectured us both about the risks." Harry smiled faintly at that, his eyes closing completely. "Will you tell me about her tomorrow?" "I'll tell you everything," James promised. "About her, about us, about magic. Everything." He stayed until Harry's breathing deepened into sleep, then quietly left the room, leaving the door cracked open so that the hallway light spilled in. He didn't want Harry to wake in darkness, afraid and uncertain of where he was. Downstairs, the other Marauders waited in tense silence. James joined them, sinking into a chair with a heavy sigh. "We need a plan," he said simply. "We're back, Harry's done the impossible, and now we need to figure out what happens next." "Dumbledore is the key," Remus said thoughtfully. "He'll have the resources to help us understand what's happened and what it means for Harry." "And what about him?" Sirius jerked his head toward Peter, who was sitting apart from the others, his shoulders hunched. James's expression hardened. "Peter betrayed us to Voldemort. He's the reason I died, the reason Lily died. In any normal circumstance, he'd be in Azkaban. But these aren't normal circumstances." "I'm sorry," Peter whispered, tears streaming down his round face. "I was afraid. The Dark Lord, he was going to win. Everyone said so. You thought you'd save your own skin by sacrificing your friends," Sirius growled. "My godson grew up in a cupboard because of you, Wormtail." Peter had no response to that, his gaze fixed on the floor in shame. "We keep him close," James decided finally. "Not out of forgiveness, but because we need to understand why Harry's magic brought him back along with us. And because turning him in means explaining how 4 dead men are suddenly alive again. And because we need to know what's coming," Remus added grimly. "Whatever spoke to you in the garden, James, it's not finished with us. Or with Harry." James nodded, his face set in determined lines. "Then we prepare. Tomorrow we contact Dumbledore. Tonight, we guard this house and my son." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of number 4, Privet Drive. In the distance, thunder rumbled, though the sky had been clear earlier. Something had changed in the world tonight, a balance disturbed, a boundary crossed. And in his borrowed bed, Harry Potter dreamed of a veil fluttering in a breezeless room, and voices calling his name from the other side. Chapter 2, The Price of Return. Morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains, casting a warm glow across Harry's face. For a moment, he lay perfectly still, certain he was dreaming. The bed beneath him was soft and spacious, nothing like his thin mattress in the cupboard. He blinked, reaching for his glasses on a bedside table that had never been his before. The events of the previous night came rushing back. Halloween. The ritual. His father. Harry bolted upright, heart hammering. Had it all been a dream? A desperate fantasy born from loneliness and that strange book? He scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over pajamas that were far too large for him, Dudley's, he realized. Someone had changed him into them while he slept. The house was quiet as Harry crept down the hallway. The Dursleys' bedroom door stood open, revealing a hastily vacated room with drawers left partially open. They really had fled in the night. That, at least, hadn't been a dream. As he reached the stairs, voices drifted up from below, male voices engaged in serious conversation. Harry descended slowly, each step bringing the voices into sharper focus. "Can't stay here indefinitely," someone was saying. The voice was calm, reasonable. Remus, Harry remembered. The Ministry will have detected the magical surge. They'll investigate. "Let them come," replied another voice, deeper, with an edge of dangerous confidence. "Sirius. We have rights. We're Harry's family. We're supposed to be dead, Padfoot." That was his father, James. Harry's heart leapt at the sound. "Our rights are complicated at best." Harry reached the bottom of the stairs and paused, suddenly shy. What if they regretted coming back? What if they were angry about being torn from death? Before he could retreat, a floorboard creaked beneath his weight. The conversation in the kitchen stopped abruptly. "Harry?" James called. "Is that you, son?" Taking a deep breath, Harry stepped into the kitchen doorway. Four men sat around the Dursleys' immaculate table, now cluttered with what appeared to be the contents of the refrigerator and pantry. James sat at the head, a half-eaten piece of toast forgotten in his hand as he turned to look at Harry. Beside him, Sirius lounged in his chair with deceptive casualness, while Remus sat straight-backed and alert. Peter hunched at the far end, separate from the others. "You're real," Harry whispered, his eyes fixed on his father. "You're still here." James's face softened. He set down his toast and opened his arms. "Come here." Harry didn't need to be asked twice. He launched himself across the kitchen and into his father's embrace, burying his face against James's chest. Strong arms wrapped around him, holding him close. "Of course we're still here," James murmured into Harry's unruly hair. "Did you think we'd vanish with the morning light?" Harry nodded against his chest, too overwhelmed to speak. "Well, we didn't," James assured him. "Though we have discovered a few, interesting things about our condition." Harry pulled back slightly to look up at his father's face. "What things?" James exchanged a glance with Remus, who nodded encouragingly. "We're not quite fully alive," James explained gently. "We seem to exist in a kind of in-between state. Not ghosts, but not completely flesh and blood either." Harry's brow furrowed. "But you feel real. You're solid." "We are," Sirius confirmed, leaning forward. "But we've noticed that when we move too far from you, we start to feel stretched. Insubstantial." "You're tied to Harry's magic," Remus elaborated. "The ritual created a connection between you and us. Your magic is what's keeping us anchored to this plane." Harry looked from one face to another, trying to understand. "So you can't leave me?" "Not very far, it seems," James said. Sirius tried going to the end of the street earlier, and he reported feeling like he was starting to fade. "Like a bad wireless signal," Sirius added with a ghost of a smile. "All fuzzy around the edges." Harry's face fell. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would trap you." James tilted Harry's chin up gently. "Hey, none of that. You didn't trap us, Harry. You gave us a chance to be with you, to protect you. That's more than we could have hoped for. But what about when I go to school?" Or if I need to go somewhere without you. We'll figure it out, James promised. We're Marauders, after all. Problem solving is our specialty. Harry nodded, not entirely convinced but willing to trust his father. He turned his attention to the feast spread across the table. Did you make breakfast? Sirius barked out a laugh. If you can call it that. None of us were ever much good in the kitchen. Your mother used to say, he broke off abruptly, glancing at James. It's okay, James said quietly. Harry should hear about Lily. He turned back to his son. Your mother used to say that between the four of us, we couldn't boil water without setting something on fire. She was the cook in our family. Harry smiled faintly, soaking up this small detail about his mother. I can cook, he offered. Aunt Petunia taught me. The atmosphere in the kitchen changed instantly. The Marauders exchanged dark looks. How old were you when your aunt started having you cook, Harry? Remus asked, his voice carefully neutral. Harry shrugged. I dunno. 4, maybe. I couldn't reach the stove, so she gave me a step stool. I burned myself a few times before I got good at it. James's jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle jumped visibly in his cheek. Sirius muttered something under his breath that sounded like a string of creative curses. Harry, James said, making a visible effort to keep his voice even, what other chores did the Dursleys make you do? Harry shifted uncomfortably, suddenly uncertain if he should answer truthfully. He didn't want to make his father angry. Just normal stuff. Cleaning, gardening, washing up. Nothing bad. Nothing bad, Sirius repeated incredulously. Just child labor. At 4 years old. It wasn't, Harry began, then stopped, unsure how to explain that this had simply been his life, the only one he'd known. It's not your fault, Harry, Remus said gently, seeming to understand Harry's discomfort. None of what happened here was your fault. But we need to understand what your life has been like so we can help you now. Harry nodded slowly. They didn't hit me, he offered, as if this somehow made everything better. Uncle Vernon yelled a lot, and sometimes I didn't get dinner if I did something freaky, but, freaky? James interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. Magic, Harry clarified. Like when I turned my teacher's hair blue, or when I ended up on the school roof somehow. They called it my freakishness. A glass on the table shattered, making Harry jump. Sirius muttered an apology, waving his hand to repair it. Harry, James said, taking a deep breath. I want you to listen to me very carefully. Magic is not freakish. It's a gift, a natural part of who you are. Who we all are. The Dursleys were wrong to make you feel otherwise. Harry nodded, oddly relieved to hear these words. I thought it might be magic. Especially after I found Mum's things in the attic. Speaking of which, Remus interjected, we should retrieve those items before we leave this house. They rightfully belong to Harry. Leave? Harry asked, looking up at his father. Where are we going? James smiled reassuringly. Somewhere safe, where we can figure out our next steps. We can't stay here, Harry. This house isn't secure, and it's only a matter of time before the Ministry of Magic investigates what happened last night. Is that bad? Harry asked. Won't they be happy you're back? The four men exchanged significant looks. It was Peter who finally answered, his voice soft and nervous. The Ministry doesn't look kindly on necromancy, Harry. It's one of the most forbidden branches of magic. What you did, bringing people back from death, they might consider it dark magic. Harry's eyes widened in alarm. But I didn't mean to do dark magic. I just wanted my family. We know that, James soothed, pulling Harry closer. And anyone who speaks to you for 5 minutes would understand your intentions were pure. But the Ministry can be rigid in its thinking. And given who we are and what happened 5 years ago, there are complications. Like what? Harry asked. Another loaded silence fell. Finally, Remus spoke, his tone gentle but direct. Harry, there's something you need to understand about how your parents died. It wasn't a car crash, as your aunt and uncle claimed. I know, Harry said. I heard you talking about it last night. Someone called Voldemort killed them. Peter flinched violently at the name. Sirius shot him a look of disgust. Yes, James confirmed. Voldemort is, a very powerful dark wizard who led a terrorist organization called the Death Eaters. They believed in pureblood supremacy, the idea that wizards from old magical families are superior to those with Muggle parents, like your mother. We fought against him, Sirius added. All of us were part of a resistance group called the Order of the Phoenix. Voldemort targeted your parents specifically, Remus continued. There was a prophecy that suggested a child born at the end of July might be his downfall. That could have meant you or another boy, Neville Longbottom. Harry struggled to absorb this information. So he came to kill me. But I survived, and you didn't. James nodded, pain flashing across his features. Your mother and I went into hiding. We used a spell called the Fidelius Charm to conceal our location. Only one person, the secret keeper, could reveal where we were. Harry noticed how everyone's gaze shifted to Peter, who seemed to shrink in his chair. Peter was our secret keeper, James said, his voice hardening slightly. He betrayed our location to Voldemort. Harry stared at the small, rat-like man, trying to reconcile this information with the fact that his magic had called him back along with the others. Why? He asked simply. Peter couldn't meet his eyes. I was afraid, he whispered. The Dark Lord was winning. He promised to spare me if I gave him what he wanted. But he didn't spare my parents, Harry said, a cold feeling spreading through his chest. He killed them. Yes, Peter admitted, tears welling in his eyes. And not a day has passed in death that I haven't regretted my cowardice. Sirius made a noise of disbelief. Save it, Wormtail. Your regrets mean nothing compared to what Harry lost. Stop, Harry said suddenly, surprising everyone. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Not now. He turned to his father. You said we need to leave. Where are we going? James studied his son's face for a moment before nodding. Right. Priorities. I think our best option is Potter Cottage in Pembrokeshire. It's not the main family home, that was destroyed in an attack during the First War, but it's a small property my parents kept as a summer home. It should be warded and under Fidelius, which will give us time to figure things out. But first, Sirius said, we need to get your mother's things from the attic. And we should contact Dumbledore. Agreed, Remus said. Though I think we should go to the cottage first, then send a message. Better to be behind secure wards before we announce our return. James nodded. Good thinking, Moony. Harry, why don't you go get dressed while we clean up here? There should be clothes in your cousin's room you can wear until we can get you proper things of your own. Harry nodded and headed back upstairs, his mind swirling with all he'd learned. His parents hadn't died in a car crash. They'd been murdered because of a prophecy. And one of the men his magic had brought back was responsible for their deaths. In Dudley's room, Harry sorted through the wardrobe, finding the smallest clothes he could, still comically large on his thin frame. As he dressed, a wave of dizziness suddenly washed over him. He staggered, catching himself on the edge of the bed. The room seemed to shimmer around him, as if he were seeing through a heat haze. When his vision cleared, Harry gasped. Standing in the corner was a translucent figure, an elderly woman in old-fashioned clothes, watching him with curious eyes. Hello. Harry whispered, his voice shaking. The woman's mouth moved, but no sound came out. She gestured at something Harry couldn't see, her expression growing increasingly frustrated. Then, as suddenly as she'd appeared, she faded away. Harry stood frozen, heart pounding. Had he imagined it? A lingering effect of the ritual perhaps. Harry? James called from downstairs. Everything all right up there? Coming. Harry called back, pushing the strange vision aside for now. He had enough to worry about without adding potential hallucinations to the list. When he returned to the kitchen, he found the Marauders had cleaned up and were preparing to leave. James held Lily's school trunk, now shrunk to the size of a matchbox in his palm. "Ready to go, son?" he asked, smiling. "We'll have to apparate, wizarding teleportation. It feels a bit strange the first time, but I'll be holding on to you." Harry nodded, moving to his father's side. "Will it hurt?" "Not hurt, exactly," James said. "More like being squeezed through a very tight tube. Some people get a bit queasy their first time." "I'll be fine," Harry said with more confidence than he felt. James crouched down to Harry's level. "I know you will. You're very brave, Harry. Braver than I was at your age, I think." The simple praise warmed Harry from the inside out. He'd never been called brave before. "All right, Marauders," James said, straightening up and wrapping an arm securely around Harry's shoulders. "Let's move out. Sirius, you take point with me and Harry. Remus, you bring Peter." Sirius's expression darkened at the mention of Peter, but he nodded, stepping closer to James and Harry. Remus gripped Peter's arm firmly, his wand visible in his other hand. "Hold on tight, Harry," James instructed. "And try to relax. Fighting the sensation makes it worse." Harry nodded, gripping his father's robes tightly. James turned on the spot, and the world compressed around them. Harry felt as if he were being forced through a rubber tube a fraction of his size. His ears popped painfully, his lungs struggled for air, and just when he thought he might pass out, the pressure released. They stood on a windswept cliff overlooking a churning sea. Salt spray misted the air, and gulls wheeled overhead. A short distance away, nestled in a protected hollow, stood a stone cottage with a thatched roof. It looked simultaneously ancient and timeless, as if it had grown from the very cliff itself. "Welcome to Porth Padrig," James said, his voice warm with nostalgia. "Potter Cottage." Harry took a deep breath of sea air, feeling oddly at home despite having never seen this place before. "It's brilliant," he said simply. Two soft pops announced the arrival of Remus and Peter. Remus released Peter's arm the moment they solidified, stepping away from him with barely disguised disgust. "The wards recognize you," Remus observed, looking at James with surprise. "I can feel them responding to your presence." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Blood wards. They're keyed to the Potter line. I wasn't sure if our current state would affect that, but apparently being magically and genetically James Potter is enough." "So the cottage knows you're you, even though you're not quite alive?" Harry asked, trying to understand. "Something like that," James confirmed. "Magic can be quite literal sometimes. I'm still James Potter, so the wards accept me. And they'll accept you too, Harry, as my son." As if on cue, Harry felt a gentle warmth wash over him, like stepping into a shaft of sunlight on a cold day. The cottage seemed to welcome him, acknowledging his right to be there. "Let's get inside," Sirius suggested, eyeing the darkening sky. "Looks like a storm's coming in." The interior of the cottage was larger than it appeared from outside, not palatially so, but comfortably spacious, with a large central living area that opened to a kitchen, and what appeared to be 3 bedrooms branching off a short hallway. Everything was draped in white dust cloths, giving the space a ghostly appearance. "It's been empty since before you were born," James explained, removing the covers from furniture to reveal well-crafted pieces in warm woods. "My parents stopped coming here after the war intensified. Too isolated for safety." Harry wandered the space, taking in evidence of his family history. Photos in silver frames showed people who shared his father's features, grandparents and great-grandparents he would never meet. A large tapestry on one wall depicted a family tree, the name Potter embroidered at the top in gold thread. Your grandparents, James said softly, coming to stand beside Harry as he examined a particular photograph. Fleamont and Euphemia Potter. They loved you very much, Harry, though they only got to see you a few times before they passed. Dragon pox, Sirius added from where he was examining the kitchen cupboards. Just a few months before you were born. They were older when they had James, thought they couldn't have children at all until he came along. Harry traced his grandfather's face in the photograph. The man had the same unruly hair that he and his father shared, though liberally streaked with silver. Beside him, Euphemia Potter had kind eyes and a warm smile. They would have spoiled you rotten, James said with a sad smile. Dad was already talking about teaching you to fly almost as soon as we told them Lily was pregnant. Something tight and painful loosened in Harry's chest at these words. He'd had a family once, people who had wanted him, who would have loved him. The knowledge was both healing and heartbreaking. Right, Remus said, bringing the moment to a gentle close. We should secure the cottage properly and send word to Dumbledore. I suggest a Patronus message, it can't be intercepted or traced. James nodded. Good idea. He broke off, frowning. Actually, I'm not sure if I can cast a Patronus in this state. Our magic seems different. I've noticed that as well, Sirius said, looking down at his conjured wand with a troubled expression. It's like casting through water instead of air. Everything works, but it feels dampened. Another side effect of our not quite living state, Remus concluded. I'll try the Patronus. My magic feels affected too, but perhaps less so. He moved to the center of the room, closed his eyes in concentration, and raised his wand. Expecto Patronum. Silver light sputtered from the tip of his wand, coalescing briefly into the shape of a wolf before dispersing into mist that quickly faded. Not strong enough, Remus said, disappointment evident in his voice. The spell requires intense positive emotion, and I think our emotional responses are somewhat muted in this state. Then we'll need to use other means, James decided. There's an owl roost on the property, if the birds haven't all gone wild. And I believe the cottage is still connected to the Floo network, though it's probably been dormant for years. I'll check the Floo, Sirius volunteered. Remus, why don't you look for the owls? What about me? Peter asked tentatively. James fixed him with a cold stare. You stay where we can see you. I haven't forgotten what you did, Wormtail, even if circumstances force us to work together now. Peter nodded miserably, shrinking into a corner of the living room. Can I help? Harry asked, eager to be useful. James's expression softened. Of course. Why don't you help me check the cottage for anything we might need? Food, supplies, that sort of thing. The place has been empty for years, but there should be preserved stores in the cellar. Harry nodded eagerly, following his father down a narrow staircase off the kitchen. The cellar was cool and dry, its stone walls lined with shelves containing jars, cans, and magically preserved packages. Preservation charms, James explained, examining a jar of what appeared to be peaches. They keep food fresh indefinitely, or nearly so. One of your grandmother's specialties. She was quite the potioneer in her day. Like my mum? Harry asked, remembering the potion supplies he'd seen in Lily's trunk. James smiled fondly. Very much like your mum. They got on famously once they met. Two brilliant minds, always experimenting with new formulas and improvements on standard recipes. As they collected items from the shelves, Harry worked up the courage to ask the question that had been bothering him since their arrival. Dad, what did Peter mean about necromancy being forbidden? Am I in trouble for bringing you back? James set down the jar he was holding and turned to face Harry fully. It's complicated, son. Necromancy, magic involving death and the dead, is considered some of the darkest magic possible, not because it's inherently evil, but because it disrupts the natural order. Death is meant to be final, a boundary not to be crossed. But I did cross it, Harry said in a small voice. You did, James agreed, crouching down to Harry's level. And I can't tell you I'm sorry you did, because it means I get to be here with you now. But there are likely to be consequences, Harry. Magical consequences for disturbing that balance, and legal consequences if the Ministry discovers what happened. What kind of magical consequences? James hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell a 6-year-old. It's hard to say precisely. But magic always seeks balance. A life restored might mean another is taken. Power given might mean power lost elsewhere. The book you used, it's ancient and dangerous, likely heavily regulated by the Department of Mysteries. The fact that it called to you, that you could use it at all, suggests you have a natural affinity for death magic. Is that bad? Harry asked, worry creeping into his voice. Does it make me dark? No, James said firmly. Magic itself isn't dark or light, it's the intention behind it that matters. Your intention was pure, Harry. You wanted your family. There's nothing dark about that. He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture Harry recognized as his own. But the Ministry might not see it that way, which is why we need to be careful. Harry nodded solemnly. I understand. I won't tell anyone what I did. Good boy, James said, squeezing Harry's shoulder gently. Now, let's get these supplies upstairs and see how the others are doing with communications. They returned to find Sirius kneeling at the fireplace, his head and shoulders inexplicably missing as they appeared to have gone into the green flames. The flu works, Remus reported. Sirius is checking with an old contact at the Department of Magical Transportation to see if the connection is being monitored. And the owls? James asked. 2 still in residence, though they're quite wild now. I've sent one with a message to Dumbledore, just a request to come to these coordinates, signed with our old order code names. No details that could be intercepted. James nodded approvingly. Good thinking. Harry and I found plenty of preserved food, so we won't starve while we wait. Sirius withdrew from the fireplace, brushing soot from his robes. Connections active but not monitored, he reported. Hasn't been used in so long the Ministry forgot about it. My contact says there's been unusual activity reported in Surrey last night, major magical discharge consistent with ritual magic. The Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes is investigating. How long do we have before they trace it to the Dursleys' house? James asked. Sirius shrugged. Hard to say. Hours, maybe a day if we're lucky. Depends on how quickly they move and whether any wizarding neighbors reported specifics. Arabella Figg, Remus said suddenly. She lives near the Dursleys, doesn't she? Dumbledore mentioned stationing her there to keep an eye on Harry. Mrs. Figg? Harry asked in surprise. The cat lady? She's a witch. Squib, Remus corrected. Born to magical parents but without magic herself. She works with the Order. She's been watching me? Harry asked, unsure how to feel about this revelation. Protecting you, James clarified. Or supposed to be. Though I have questions about how effectively that was happening, given what we've learned about your life with the Dursleys. Harry shrugged uncomfortably. She was nice enough. Let me look at pictures of her cats when Aunt Petunia left me with her. James and Sirius exchanged dark looks at this casual confirmation of neglect. If she's reporting to Dumbledore, he may already know something happened, Remus pointed out. The Dursleys fleeing in the middle of the night would have been noticed. All the more reason to expect him soon, James agreed. We should. He was interrupted by a crash from the kitchen. All 4 men had their wands out instantly, moving with the coordinated precision of those who had fought together before. James pushed Harry behind him, shielding him with his body. Show yourself. Sirius called, his wand trained on the kitchen doorway. A small, wizened creature with large bat-like ears and bulging eyes peered around the door frame. It wore what appeared to be a tea towel fashioned into a toga, emblazoned with the Potter family crest. "Master James," the creature squeaked in disbelief. "Master James is returned from beyond?" Mimsy is not believing her eyes. James lowered his wand, surprise evident on his face. "Mimsy? You're still bound to the cottage?" The house elf stepped fully into the room, twisting her long fingers together nervously. "Mimsy is staying to care for Potter Cottage after Masters and Mistress passed on. Mimsy is keeping everything ready for when little Master Harry comes of age to claim his inheritance." Her huge eyes shifted to Harry, widening impossibly further. "Is this being little Master Harry? Grown so big already?" She bowed low, her nose nearly touching the floor. "Mimsy is honored to serve the Potter heir." Harry looked to his father in confusion, having never seen a house elf before. "Harry, this is Mimsy," James explained. "She's a house elf who has served the Potter family for generations. House elves are magical beings who bond with wizarding families, helping with household tasks and magic." "Like a servant?" Harry asked uncertainly. Mimsy straightened, looking somewhat affronted. "Mimsy is not being a servant. Mimsy is being a Potter elf. Very different, young master. Very different indeed. It's a magical symbiosis," Remus explained. "House elves need the magical bond with a family to thrive, and in return, they care for the family and its properties. It's a complex relationship with a difficult history." Mimsy nodded vigorously. "Exactly what Wolf Wizard says." "But Master James," her expression grew troubled as she studied him. "Master James is not being properly alive. Mimsy can feel it. Master James is being in between." "Yes, Mimsy," James confirmed gently. "I'm not fully returned. None of us are." He gestured to Sirius and Remus, then reluctantly to Peter. "We're bound to Harry's magic, existing somewhere between life and death." The house elf's ears drooped. "This is being very powerful, very dangerous magic. Little Master Harry is doing this?" All eyes turned to Harry, who nodded hesitantly. "I found a book," he explained. "It showed me how to bring them back." Mimsy approached Harry cautiously, her huge eyes studying him with a mixture of awe and concern. "Young Master is having strong connection to death magic. Mimsy can sense it, like cold shadow around his magic. Is not being dark, exactly, but is not being light either." "What do you mean, Mimsy?" James asked sharply. "What do you sense about Harry's magic?" The house elf tilted her head, considering. "Master Harry's magic is changed by what he did. Is having, doorway in it now. Doorway to the other side. Is why masters can stay here instead of going back beyond the veil." Harry shivered at this description. "Can you close it?" he asked. "The doorway?" Mimsy shook her head solemnly. "Is not being something that can be closed now. Is part of young Master's magic." "But," she hesitated, twisting her hands nervously. "But what?" James prompted. "But young Master must be careful. Death does not like being cheated. We'll be looking for balance." A heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling around the eaves of the cottage. Rain began to patter against the windows, the promised storm finally arriving. "We need Dumbledore," Remus said quietly. "This is beyond our understanding." As if summoned by the name, a silver phoenix materialized in the center of the room, its light illuminating the concerned faces gathered there. When it spoke, it was with Albus Dumbledore's voice. "I have received your message and will arrive shortly. Please lower the wards to permit my entry." The Patronus dissolved into silvery mist that quickly faded away. James moved immediately to the front door, placing his hand on a carved symbol beside it. "I, James Potter, heir to the House of Potter, temporarily lower the blood wards to permit entry to Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore." The symbol glowed briefly beneath his palm. James stepped back, nodding to Sirius and Remus, who positioned themselves strategically in the room. Peter remained in his corner, clearly trying to make himself as inconspicuous as possible. "Harry," James said, "I want you to stay by me. Dumbledore is a good man, someone we trust, but he may be surprised by what he finds here." Harry nodded, moving to stand beside his father. "Will he be angry about what I did?" James rested a hand on Harry's shoulder. "Concerned, perhaps, but not angry. Dumbledore understands better than most that love can drive us to extraordinary acts." Moments later, there was a crack of apparition from outside. The cottage door swung open to reveal a tall, thin man with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles perched on a crooked nose. He wore sweeping robes of midnight blue embroidered with silver stars. His expression, as he surveyed the room, shifted from cautious alertness to profound shock. "By all that is magical," Albus Dumbledore breathed, one hand gripping the doorframe for support. "James. Sirius. Remus. And Peter." "Hello, Headmaster," James said quietly. "It's been a while." Dumbledore stepped into the cottage, his piercing blue eyes moving from one man to another before finally settling on Harry. "Harry Potter," he said softly. "What have you done?" Harry shrank against his father's side, intimidated by the wizard's intensity. James's arm tightened protectively around his shoulders. "Perhaps we should all sit down," Remus suggested. "This will take some explaining." Dumbledore nodded slowly, moving to an armchair with a grace that belied his apparent age. The others arranged themselves around the room, James and Harry on the sofa, Sirius and Remus in chairs positioned to flank them. Peter remained standing, half hidden in shadows. "I confess," Dumbledore began, "when I received a message signed by Moony, Padfoot, and Prongs, I thought it either an extremely poor joke or a trap. Yet here you stand, for men who died 5 years ago, in the company of a child who should be safely with his relatives in Surrey." "Not safely," Sirius growled. "Not by any definition of the word." Dumbledore's gaze sharpened. "Explain." Over the next half hour, they did just that. James described how Harry had found the Book of Necromancy and performed the resurrection ritual. Remus explained their current state, bound to Harry's magic, neither fully alive nor dead. Sirius, barely containing his anger, detailed the conditions they'd found Harry living in at the Dursleys'. Throughout, Dumbledore listened in silence, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Only when the tale reached its conclusion did he speak. "The book," he said. "May I see it?" James hesitated, glancing at Harry. "It's dangerous." "Precisely why I should examine it," Dumbledore countered gently. "Few living wizards have my experience with such artifacts." After a moment's consideration, James nodded to Remus, who retrieved the velvet-wrapped book from a side table. He handed it to Dumbledore with evident reluctance, as if even touching it was unpleasant. The headmaster unwrapped the volume carefully, his eyebrows rising as he studied the cover. "The veil between," he murmured. "A genuine copy, not a reproduction. This is extraordinarily rare." He looked up at Harry. "And you could read this, child? Understand its contents?" Harry nodded. "Not all of it. But the parts about the ritual, they made sense to me. Like they were written just for me to find." "Fascinating," Dumbledore murmured. "And deeply concerning." He rewrapped the book carefully. "This grimoire was thought lost centuries ago. Its author, Cadmus Peverell, was said to have created it after the death of his betrothed, desperate to retrieve her from beyond. The magic it contains is some of the oldest known to wizardkind, older than Hogwarts itself." "Peverell?" James repeated, his expression sharpening. "As in the Deathly Hallows Peverells?" Dumbledore's eyes twinkled briefly. "The very same. I should not be surprised you know the connection, given your family's history." "What connection?" Harry asked, looking between the adults in confusion. "A story for another time," James said, ruffling Harry's hair affectionately. The important question now is, what do we do? The Ministry will be investigating the magical surge from the ritual. Harry's magic has been altered. And the four of us are in a state that defies magical understanding. Dumbledore stroked his beard thoughtfully. Indeed. The situation is unprecedented, to say the least. He focused on Harry, his gaze softening. Harry, may I ask why you chose to attempt such powerful magic? You must have known, on some level, that it was dangerous. Harry met the old wizard's eyes directly. I wanted my family, he said simply. The Dursleys said my parents were dead, and I was alone. I didn't want to be alone anymore. Something in Dumbledore's expression cracked, a flash of profound sadness crossing his features before his composure returned. I see. And that intention, pure, driven by love rather than darker motivations, may explain how you succeeded where trained adult wizards have failed for centuries. What happens now? Harry asked. Dumbledore sighed deeply. That, my boy, is a complex question. There are several immediate concerns. First, your safety. The Ministry will eventually trace the magical signature to your aunt and uncle's home. When they do, questions will be asked. They can't take Harry, James said firmly. I won't allow it. Nor I, Dumbledore agreed, surprising them all. But we must be strategic. Your return, all of you, presents legal and magical complications that must be handled delicately. Can you help us? Remus asked. I can and will, Dumbledore assured them. But first, I must understand more about your current condition. He turned to James. You mentioned being bound to Harry's magic. Have you tested the limitations of this bond? James nodded. We can't move too far from him without beginning to fade, for lack of a better term. Our magic works but feels dampened, filtered through whatever connects us to Harry. And Harry? Dumbledore turned his penetrating gaze to the boy. Have you noticed any changes in yourself since the ritual? Harry hesitated, unsure whether to mention the ghostly woman he'd seen. I get tired more easily, he admitted. And sometimes I feel strange. Like I can sense things I couldn't before. What kinds of things? I saw a woman this morning, Harry said quietly. At the Dursleys. She was transparent, like a ghost, but she wasn't really there. No one else saw her. The adults exchanged concerned glances. Mimsy, who had been silently observing from the kitchen doorway, stepped forward. Is being doorway in young master's magic, she explained. Is letting him see those who have passed beyond. House elves is sometimes having similar sight. Is not dangerous, but is being unusual for wizards. Dumbledore nodded slowly. The ritual appears to have opened Harry's magical senses to death and its domain. This ability may develop further as he grows. Is that safe? James asked, concern evident in his voice. With proper guidance, yes, Dumbledore replied. Though I suspect Harry will require specialized teaching as his abilities manifest. He turned back to Harry. Have you experienced anything else unusual? Dreams, perhaps. Sensations that are difficult to describe? Harry thought for a moment. Sometimes I think I can feel endings, he said haltingly. Like when a flower is about to wilt, or when an insect is dying nearby. It's like a tiny cold spot in the air. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose. Most remarkable. Harry appears to be developing necromantic senses, an awareness of death and its processes. He stroked his beard thoughtfully. This could be quite valuable, properly channeled. Valuable? James repeated incredulously. He's 6 years old, Albus. He shouldn't have to deal with death at all, let alone develop some kind of magical death sense. I quite agree, Dumbledore said gently. But we must address reality as it stands, not as we wish it to be. Harry has opened a connection to death itself, and that cannot be undone. Our responsibility now is to help him understand and control these abilities, not fear them. Before James could respond, a soft chime sounded throughout the cottage. Mimsey's ears perked up in alarm. "Warning wards is being triggered," she announced. "Wizards is operating onto the property." 3. "No, 4 of them." Dumbledore rose swiftly. "The Ministry has found us sooner than expected. They must have traced the owl. Or followed you," Sirius suggested grimly, drawing his wand. "What's the plan, Albus?" "We cannot afford a confrontation," Dumbledore decided quickly. "Not until we better understand your condition and Harry's legal status." He turned to Mimsy. "Is there a secure location within the wards where they might hide temporarily?" Mimsy nodded vigorously. "Old Smuggler's cellar beneath West Wing. Is being hidden by old Potter magic, not Ministry-registered wards." "Perfect," Dumbledore said. "Quickly now, all of you. I will speak with the Ministry representatives and attempt to misdirect them." James scooped Harry into his arms. "Let's go, son. Another adventure. This way, masters." Mimsy urged, leading them through the cottage to what appeared to be a solid stone wall. She pressed her small hand against a particular stone, and a section of the wall slid silently aside, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "Down quickly. Mimsy will seal and trance." Remus and Sirius entered first, wands lit to illuminate the way. James followed with Harry, and Peter scurried after them. The wall slid closed behind them just as the sound of knocking echoed from the cottage's front door. The smuggler's cellar was surprisingly spacious, a long, low room with stone walls and a packed dirt floor. Old crates and barrels lined one wall, while another held racks of dusty bottles. "Grandfather's wine collection," James explained in a whisper, setting Harry down gently. "And probably some less legal imports from the continent." The Potters weren't always strictly law-abiding. Despite the tension of the moment, Harry found himself smiling at this small insight into his family history. "Were we pirates?" James chuckled softly. "Not exactly, though I believe a great-great-uncle did captain a ship for a time. The cottage's location made it ideal for avoiding tariffs and taxation during less settled times." Sirius moved to the far end of the cellar, where a small, circular window set high in the wall allowed a limited view of the cottage's front approach. "For Ministry officials," he reported quietly. "Magical law enforcement, by their robes. And, bloody hell, Bartemius Crouch is with them." "That's not good," Remus murmured. "Crouch isn't known for his flexibility in interpreting magical law." "Who's Bartemius Crouch?" Harry whispered. "Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement," James explained. "A hardliner who believes dark magic deserves no quarter and no mercy. And necromancy definitely qualifies as dark in his book," Sirius added grimly. They fell silent as voices became audible from above, not clear enough to distinguish words, but the tone suggested a heated discussion. Dumbledore's measured cadence contrasted sharply with a more strident male voice that rose occasionally in what sounded like accusation. Harry felt a strange sensation beginning to build in his chest, a cold pressure that expanded with each breath. The air in the cellar seemed to thicken, shimmering slightly as it had in Dudley's room earlier. To his alarm, translucent figures began to materialize around them, men in old-fashioned clothing, some carrying crates, others wielding wands or muggle pistols. "Dad," Harry whispered urgently, tugging at his father's robes. "Do you see them?" James looked around in confusion. "See what, Harry?" "The people. The ghosts. They're everywhere." The Marauders exchanged worried glances. Remus moved closer to Harry, studying him with concern. "Harry, there's no one here but us," he said gently. "But I can see them," Harry insisted. "Men carrying crates and bottles. They're dressed like in old pictures." "Smugglers," James realized. You're seeing echoes of the past, Harry. The previous occupants of this cellar. Harry watched in fascination as the spectral smugglers moved through their routines, oblivious to the living people in their midst. Unlike the woman he'd seen at Privet Drive, these figures seemed less aware, more like a recording playing out the same actions repeatedly. It's your death sense developing, Remus theorized. Places with history, especially places where people may have died or lived intensely, seem to be more visible to you. Is anyone looking at us? Sirius asked pragmatically. Any of these ghosts aware of our presence? Harry scanned the cellar carefully. No. They're just going about their business. Like a memory playing over and over. Good, James said, though he still looked troubled. Let us know if that changes. The voices above grew louder, footsteps crossing the cottage floor directly over their heads. The spectral smugglers continued their silent work, occasionally passing through the living occupants of the cellar, causing momentary cold spots that made Harry shiver. Suddenly, a new figure appeared, different from the others. This was an elderly man in wizarding robes, his expression alert and focused directly on Harry. Unlike the repetitive movements of the smugglers, this apparition moved with purpose, approaching Harry deliberately. Potter child, the ghost said, his voice faint but audible to Harry alone. You have the gift of death's sight. Harry stared in shock, momentarily forgetting to keep his voice down. You can see me. You can talk to me. James clapped a hand over Harry's mouth, eyes wide with alarm. Harry, quiet. The footsteps above paused ominously. The ghost nodded to Harry, ignoring the others. I was once master of this house. Thaddeus Potter, your many times grandfather. I too walked with one foot in the land of the dead. Harry made a muffled sound against his father's hand, his eyes wide with questions. James slowly removed his hand, putting a finger to his lips in warning. Harry nodded his understanding, then whispered as quietly as he could, he says he's Thaddeus Potter, my ancestor. James's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Thaddeus? The necromancer? The ghost smiled thinly, evidently pleased to be recognized. Tell him I am indeed that Thaddeus. And tell him that what you have done has consequences beyond your understanding. The veil is torn, child. Things may cross that should not. Harry relayed this message in the barest whisper. The Marauders exchanged troubled glances. Ask him if he knows how to repair your condition, Remus suggested softly. How to make their return permanent without endangering you. Harry put the question to the ghost, who shook his translucent head. There is no making death's release permanent without equivalent exchange, Thaddeus replied. Balance must be maintained. For every life returned, another must be surrendered. For every soul anchored to the mortal plane, another must be severed before its time. When Harry translated this, the color drained from James's face. No, he said firmly. Not at that price. Never at that price. The footsteps above had moved to another part of the cottage. The tension in the cellar eased slightly. There might be another way, the ghost continued, his form beginning to fade. The book you used, my book, has a counterpart. Seek the bridge between in the Department of Mysteries. But beware, the unspeakables guard it jealously, and for good reason. With those cryptic words, Thaddeus Potter faded completely from view. The other spectral smugglers continued their endless routine, oblivious to the momentous conversation that had just occurred. What did he say? Sirius prompted when Harry fell silent. He said there's another book, The Bridge Between. It's in something called the Department of Mysteries. The adults exchanged significant looks. That complicates matters, Remus murmured. The Department of Mysteries is the most secure division of the Ministry of Magic. Its contents are known only to unspeakables, wizards and witches who have taken magical vows of secrecy. And we can hardly walk into the ministry as we are, Sirius added. Not with Crouch hunting for whoever performed unauthorized necromancy. One problem at a time, James said firmly. First, we need to get through this inspection without being discovered. As if on cue, the footsteps above began moving with more purpose. A voice, presumably Crouch's, rose clearly enough to be heard through the floor. I want every inch of this property searched. Dumbledore, with all due respect, your assurances are not sufficient. Potter's magical signature was detected at both locations, and I intend to find out why. Dumbledore's reply was too quiet to hear, but his tone suggested calm reason in the face of Crouch's agitation. They're going to search the cottage, Sirius whispered. How secure is this hiding place, Prongs? Very, James replied with more confidence than he clearly felt. The smuggler's cellar is hidden by old family magic, older than ministry registration requirements. Unless they specifically know to look for it, they shouldn't find it. What about magical detection spells? Remus asked. Harry's magical signature is what they're tracking. That's a problem, James admitted. Harry's magic is currently quite distinctive, especially after the ritual. Harry bit his lip, feeling responsible for their predicament. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't mean to get everyone in trouble. James pulled him into a one-armed hug. You have nothing to apologize for, Harry. You did what anyone would do in your situation, you sought your family. We'll handle whatever comes next, together. Footsteps moved across the cottage, room by room, growing closer to the wall concealing their hiding place. Harry felt the cold pressure in his chest intensify. The spectral smugglers flickered like a television with poor reception, their forms destabilizing as Harry's anxiety grew. Something's happening, he whispered urgently. The ghosts are changing. Indeed, the apparitions were shifting, their repetitive movements accelerating, growing more agitated. Some turned, suddenly aware of the living occupants in their midst. Their expressions transformed from mindless routine to confusion, then to anger. Intruders, one mouthed silently, pointing at Harry and the others. Thieves. This isn't good, Harry murmured, watching as more of the spectral smugglers became aware of them, advancing with ghostly hands outstretched. What's happening, Harry? James asked tensely, unable to see what his son perceived. They're angry. They know we're here now. The temperature in the cellar plummeted. Frost began to form on the wine bottles, spreading across the stone floor in crystalline patterns. The Marauders' breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air. This is more than just seeing the dead, Remus said, his voice tight with concern. Harry's emotions are affecting them, making them manifest physically. Above, the footsteps paused directly outside the hidden entrance. A voice muttered detection spells, the words indistinct but the magical intent clear. They're going to find us, Sirius whispered. And if they do, they'll take Harry, James finished grimly. Separate him from us. And without his magic sustaining us. You'll disappear, Harry realized, panic blooming in his chest. You'll go back to being dead. The spectral smugglers surged forward, their anger feeding on Harry's fear. One passed through Sirius, who gasped and staggered, his form momentarily wavering like a mirage. What the hell? He hissed, looking down at his hands in alarm. They're affecting us, Remus observed tensely. Our connection to this plane is already tenuous. These manifestations are disrupting it further. Outside their hiding place, the detection spells intensified. The wall began to shimmer slightly, the concealment magic struggling against the probing spells. We need to calm the spirits, James decided, turning to Harry. Harry, they're responding to your emotions. Can you try to relax? To let go of your fear? Harry nodded, though his heart raced with panic. He closed his eyes, trying to focus on positive thoughts, his father's embrace, the knowledge that he wasn't alone anymore. Gradually, his breathing steadied. That's it, son, James encouraged softly. You're doing brilliantly. The spectral smugglers slowed their advance, their anger seemingly confused by Harry's calming emotions. The temperature in the cellar began to rise incrementally, the frost receding from the bottles and floor. Above them, the detection spells ceased. Footsteps moved away from the hidden entrance, continuing their methodical search of the cottage. The crisis had passed, at least momentarily. "Well done, Harry," Remus whispered, relief evident in his voice. "Indeed," came a new voice from the shadows of the cellar. "Most impressive control for one so young." They all whirled toward the sound. From the darkest corner of the cellar stepped a figure none of them had noticed before, an elderly man with a gaunt face and eyes that seemed to hold no light whatsoever. Despite his apparent age, he moved with fluid grace, his black robes flowing around him like liquid shadow. "Who are you?" James demanded, pushing Harry behind him protectively. "How did you get in here?" The old man smiled thinly. "Your ancestors were not the only ones who knew of this cellar's existence, James Potter. As for who I am..." He inclined his head in a slight bow. "Mortimer Blackthorne, at your service." Harry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the spectral smugglers. This man was alive, not a ghost or apparition, yet something about him felt wrong, empty, like a hole in the world shaped like a person. "Blackthorne," Remus repeated, recognition flashing in his eyes. "The necromancer. You're supposed to be dead." "Death and I have an understanding," Blackthorne replied smoothly. "Much as you appear to have developed, thanks to this remarkable child." His gaze shifted to Harry, hunger evident in his sunken eyes. "You sensed my arrival, didn't you, boy? You felt the wrongness of me." Harry nodded hesitantly, still half hidden behind his father. "Splendid," Blackthorne murmured. "Such natural affinity is exceedingly rare. With proper training." He trailed off, his expression speculative. "What do you want?" Sirius demanded, his wand trained on the intruder. "To help, of course," Blackthorne replied, as if the answer were obvious. "I felt the disturbance in Death's realm last night. A tearing so profound it resonated through every necromantic working in Britain. Naturally, I was curious." He gestured to the Marauders. "And now I find the source, a child who accomplished what takes most practitioners decades of study to even attempt." "We don't need your help," James said flatly. "Whatever you're offering, we're not interested." Blackthorne's smile didn't waver. "Are you quite certain?" "I know more about your condition than anyone alive. I know the price that death will demand for this imbalance. I know how your son's new abilities will develop, and the dangers they present." Above them, the search continued. They could hear furniture being moved, cabinets opened and closed. "This isn't the time or place for this discussion," Remus pointed out. "If you truly wish to help, perhaps you could assist us in avoiding detection by the ministry officials currently searching the cottage." Blackthorne chuckled softly. "Already done, my wolfish friend. I've added my own concealment charms to this cellar's protections. They won't find us unless I wish it." "Why would you help us?" Sirius asked suspiciously. "Self-interest, primarily," Blackthorne admitted candidly. "The boy represents a significant advance in necromantic understanding. I've spent 2 centuries studying the boundaries between life and death, yet never achieved what he managed in a single night with no training whatsoever." He turned to Harry, his eyes gleaming with fascination. "I wish to understand how. And perhaps, in exchange for that understanding, I can help you stabilize your father's return." "You know how to make them permanently alive?" Harry asked, stepping out from behind James despite his father's attempt to keep him back. "Harry," James began, but Harry had already moved toward Blackthorne, hope evident in his young face. "Not exactly permanent," Blackthorne clarified. "Nothing related to death is truly permanent. But I know methods to anchor souls more firmly to the physical plane. To extend what you've accomplished from temporary to indefinite." "At what cost?" Remus asked sharply. "There's always a price with necromancy." Blackthorne spread his hands in a gesture of openness. "Of course there is. Magic demands balance. But the price need not be paid all at once, nor by a single individual. He fixed Harry with his unsettling gaze. We can discuss specifics once we're away from here. The Ministry's search will continue for some time, and Dumbledore, for all his power, cannot misdirect them indefinitely. We're not going anywhere with you, James said firmly. Then you'll likely be separated from your son before nightfall, Blackthorn replied, his tone matter-of-fact. Crouch is not known for his leniency, especially regarding magic he deems dark. The boy will be taken into Ministry custody, studied, perhaps even have his magic bound to prevent further necromantic workings. Harry paled at this prediction. They can do that? Bind my magic? In cases of dangerous magical ability, yes, Remus confirmed reluctantly. It's rare, but there are precedents. And what happens to us if Harry is taken? Sirius asked, though his grim expression suggested he already knew the answer. Without his magic sustaining you? Blackthorn raised an eyebrow. You return beyond the veil. Permanently this time, I suspect. The ritual that brought you back was unique, a convergence of the boy's raw power, his blood connection to James Potter, and a very specific stellar alignment. It cannot be replicated. James knelt before Harry, taking his small hands in his own. Listen to me, son. Whatever happens, you'll be all right. If the Ministry takes you, Dumbledore will ensure you're treated well. He won't let them bind your magic or harm you. But you'll be gone, Harry whispered, tears welling in his eyes. All of you. I'll be alone again. You're never alone, James promised fiercely. Even if we can't be with you physically, we'll always be watching over you. Always. Harry shook his head, stubborn determination replacing his tears. No. I won't let that happen. I brought you back, and I'm going to keep you here. Such admirable resolve, Blackthorn commented. But good intentions alone won't deter Bartemius Crouch. You need options, and I'm offering one. Which is what, exactly? Sirius demanded. Safe passage from this cottage to a property of mine, unplottable, heavily warded, and unknown to the Ministry. A place where the boy can learn to control his new abilities and where we can work on stabilizing your condition. And in return, you want to study Harry, Remus concluded, his tone making it clear what he thought of the arrangement. Study, teach, guide, Blackthorn corrected smoothly. The boy has awakened abilities few living wizards possess. Without proper training, those abilities could become dangerous, to himself and others. Harry looked up at his father questioningly. James's expression was troubled, torn between distrust of Blackthorn and fear for Harry's safety. We need time to discuss this, James finally said. Privately. Blackthorn inclined his head. Of course. Though I should note that the Ministry team is approaching this area again. Their detection spells are becoming more precise. He gestured to a dark alcove at the far end of the cellar. I'll wait there while you confer. Do try to be expeditious. As Blackthorn withdrew to the indicated alcove, the Marauders gathered in a tight circle around Harry. I don't trust him, Sirius stated flatly. His reputation is darker than my family's, and that's saying something. Agreed, Remus nodded. Blackthorn is known to have experimented with magic that crosses ethical boundaries even among those who study death. But he might be right about the Ministry, James admitted reluctantly. If they find Harry, they'll separate us. And without us to protect him. Dumbledore won't let them hurt Harry, Peter spoke up for the first time since entering the cellar. He'll protect him. Sirius shot him a venomous look. Like he protected him by leaving him with those monsters for 5 years. Forgive me if I don't place absolute faith in Albus Dumbledore's judgment. What about the bridge between? Harry suggested. The book Thaddeus mentioned. If we could find that, breaking into the Department of Mysteries would be nearly impossible, Remus pointed out gently. And attempting it would only add to the charges against us. Harry's shoulders slumped. So we have to go with him. With Blackthorn? James sighed heavily. I don't see many alternatives, at least in the short term. But, he added, seeing Harry's concerned expression, we go on our terms. We stay together. We leave the moment we sense any danger. And we keep looking for other solutions. The others nodded in reluctant agreement. James turned toward the alcove where Blackthorn waited. We'll accept your offer of sanctuary, he called. Temporarily. Under certain conditions. Blackthorn emerged from the shadows, his expression satisfied. I expected nothing less. Name your terms, Mr. Potter. We stay together, all of us, including Peter. You make no attempt to separate Harry from us. You share all information you discover about our condition. And we leave the moment we choose to, with no interference from you. Reasonable stipulations, Blackthorn agreed smoothly. Though I would add one of my own, the boy agrees to learn from me. His abilities require guidance that none of you can provide. James looked to Harry, leaving the decision in his hands. Harry. This affects you most of all. Harry considered for a moment, then nodded decisively. I'll learn from him. But only if you're there too, Dad. All of you. Agreed, Blackthorn said. Now, we should depart. My concealment charms won't hold indefinitely against ministry detection spells. How? Remus asked practically. We can't apparate with Harry in his current state, his magical core is still recovering from the ritual. And port keys can be traced. I have my methods, Blackthorn replied cryptically. From within his robes, he withdrew what appeared to be a small silver bell. This will transport us to my estate. It operates on principles older than standard port keys, untraceable by conventional means. Unconventional means, however. Sirius pressed. Blackthorn's thin lips curved in amusement. Let's just say it travels through paths the ministry prefers not to acknowledge exist. James looked deeply uncomfortable but nodded. Harry stays with me during transport. Of course. Blackthorn held out the bell. One by one, they each placed a finger upon it, James holding Harry securely against him with his free arm, Sirius and Remus flanking them protectively, Peter touching the bell with evident reluctance. Mortis domum, Blackthorn intoned. The world around them didn't spin as it would with a port key. Instead, it folded, like paper being creased and then unfolded into a new shape. Harry felt as if they were briefly passing through somewhere very cold and very dark, a place with no light or sound, only the sensation of something vast and ancient watching them pass. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the strange transportation ended. They stood in a grand entrance hall of a manor house that seemed constructed entirely of black stone. Tall windows let in what appeared to be moonlight, though it had been daytime when they left the cottage. Welcome, Blackthorn announced, to Raven's Hollow. My home for the past century and a half. Harry swayed slightly, the unusual mode of travel having taxed his already depleted magical reserves. James steadied him, concern evident in his face. Harry needs rest, he stated firmly. Food and sleep before anything else. Blackthorn nodded, gesturing to a spiral staircase that curved upward from the entrance hall. Guest quarters are on the second floor. The house elves will provide whatever you require. His sunken eyes fixed on Harry with disconcerting intensity. Rest well, young Potter. Tomorrow, your education begins. As Blackthorn glided away down a shadowy corridor, the Marauders exchanged troubled glances. They had escaped the immediate threat of the ministry, but at what cost? What game was Mortimer Blackthorn playing, and how did Harry figure into his plans? For Harry, exhausted by the day's events, these questions faded into the background. He had his father. He had a family of sorts. For now, that was enough. But as James carried him up the spiral staircase, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with this place, something beyond Blackthorn's unsettling presence. The shadows seemed too deep, the moonlight too pale. And in those shadows, just at the edge of his developing death sense, he could feel something. Waiting. Watching. Something that knew his name. Chapter 3, Shadows and Bonds. Raven's Hollow lived up to its name. The mansion sat in perpetual twilight, despite the time of day. Black stone walls absorbed what little light filtered through tall, narrow windows. Shadows gathered in corners like living things, shifting when no one was looking directly at them. Harry woke from a fitful sleep, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar canopy bed with its heavy black velvet curtains. The events of the previous days rushed back, the ritual, his father's return, their escape from the ministry, and finally, their uneasy alliance with Mortimer Blackthorne. Something cold brushed against his cheek. Harry sat bolt upright, heart hammering in his chest. At the foot of his bed stood a woman in Victorian mourning clothes, her face partially obscured by a black veil. She wasn't fully transparent like the ghosts at Hogwarts Harry had heard about from his father's stories. This spirit had substance, a weight to her presence that pressed against the air around her. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves rustling. "The Master collects children like you. Bright souls with death's touch upon them." "Who are you?" Harry asked, pulling the blankets up to his chin. "Elizabeth," she replied. "I was his first student, long ago. Now I am, something else." She drifted closer, the temperature dropping several degrees with her approach. "He will try to bind you as he bound me. Be wary, Harry Potter." Before Harry could ask more questions, the door to his bedroom burst open. James Potter stood in the doorway, wand raised, his expression alert and concerned. "Harry?" "I felt," he broke off, scanning the room. "Is someone in here with you?" Harry glanced to where Elizabeth had been standing, but the spirit had vanished. "There was a woman," he explained. "A ghost, I think. She said her name was Elizabeth." James entered the room fully, sitting on the edge of Harry's bed. "What did she want?" "She warned me about Blackthorne. Said he collects children with death's touch." Harry bit his lip, looking up at his father. "Dad, I don't like this place. The shadows feel hungry." James nodded grimly. "I don't like it either, son. None of us do. We've been discussing our options while you slept." He ran a hand through his perpetually messy hair, a gesture Harry had already come to recognize as a sign of his father's anxiety. "Unfortunately, we're somewhat limited at the moment. The ministry is still searching for us, and our condition." He gestured to himself, "makes conventional hiding places problematic." "Because you need to stay near me," Harry said, understanding. "Or you'll fade." "Exactly. But we're working on it. Remus thinks there might be books in Blackthorne's library that could help us understand our situation better." He forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "In the meantime, we play along. Learn what we can from our host, while keeping our guard up." Harry nodded, though the thought of spending more time in this oppressive mansion made his stomach churn. "How long do we have to stay?" "Hopefully not long. A few days, maybe a week." James reached out to smooth Harry's unruly hair, so like his own, in a gesture of comfort. "I won't let anything happen to you, Harry. I promise." The bedroom door opened again, revealing Sirius. "Breakfast is ready," he announced, then frowned at their serious expressions. "Everything all right in here?" Harry had a visitor, James explained. "A spirit named Elizabeth with warnings about our gracious host." Sirius's eyebrows shot up. "Add that to the growing list of red flags about this place." He approached the bed, offering Harry a wink and a conspiratorial smile. "Ready to face the day, pup?" Remus managed to convince the house elves to make pancakes instead of whatever ghastly concoction Blackthorne usually consumes. Despite his unease, Harry found himself smiling at Sirius's attempt to lighten the mood. There was something about his father's best friend, a combination of irreverence and fierce loyalty, that made Harry feel safe even in this unsettling place. "Pancakes sound brilliant," he said, pushing back the heavy blankets. "That's my godson," Sirius said with approval. "Food first, then plotting our inevitable daring escape." James rolled his eyes, but Harry noticed his tense posture relaxing slightly. "Subtle, Padfoot. Very subtle." "Subtlety is overrated," Sirius replied with a dismissive wave. "Besides, I'm pretty sure our host already knows we're not planning extended residency in this mausoleum he calls a home." As if summoned by Sirius's words, a soft knock sounded at the door. Without waiting for a response, Mortimer Blackthorne entered, his skeletal frame draped in flowing grey robes that seemed to absorb the light around them. "I trust you all slept well," he inquired, though his sunken eyes suggested he cared little for the answer. His gaze fixed on Harry with that same unsettling hunger from the previous night. "I've prepared the Eastern study for our first lesson, young Potter. After you've eaten, of course." "Lesson?" James repeated, shifting subtly to place himself between Harry and Blackthorne. "Indeed," Blackthorne replied smoothly. "As agreed, I am to teach the boy about his emerging abilities. Death magic is not to be trifled with, especially by one so young and untrained. Without proper guidance, his gift could become unpredictable." The way Blackthorne said, "unpredictable," made it sound like a fate worse than death itself. Harry shivered despite the warming charms that now permeated the room, James's subtle wandwork to combat the mansion's perpetual chill. "I'll be present for all lessons," James stated firmly. It wasn't a request. "As you wish," Blackthorne conceded with a slight inclination of his head. "Though I should warn you that death magic can be particularly taxing for those in your unique state. Your connection to the living world is already tenuous. Proximity to active necromantic workings may strain it further." "I'll risk it," James replied flatly. Blackthorne's lips curved in what might have been a smile on a more human face. "Very well. 1 hour after breakfast, then." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Potter, do remind young Harry that spirits in this house are not always what they appear to be. Some are echoes, some are guardians, and some—" his voice dropped to a whisper. "Some are traps for the unwary." With that cryptic warning, he glided from the room, leaving a chill in his wake that had nothing to do with temperature. "Well, he's not creepy at all," Sirius muttered sarcastically. "Can't imagine why we were hesitant to accept his hospitality." "Let's just get through breakfast," James sighed. "Remus and I will accompany Harry to this lesson. Sirius, you and Peter continue exploring the mansion. There must be another way out besides that bell he used to bring us here." "On it," Sirius agreed. "Though I'm not thrilled about working with the rat." "We need all hands on deck," James reminded him. Personal feelings aside. Harry remained quiet during this exchange, his thoughts turning to the spirit of Elizabeth and her warning. What had she meant about Blackthorne binding her? And what did the necromancer really want with him? Breakfast in Blackthorne's dining hall was a somber affair. The long table of black marble could have seated 30, yet their small group clustered at one end, the empty chairs a silent reminder of their isolation. House elves wearing grey pillowcases served pancakes and fruit, their movements mechanical, their eyes downcast. "These elves give me the creeps," Sirius muttered, low enough that only their immediate group could hear. "They're like shells." Remus nodded in agreement. "I suspect they're bound by more than the usual house elf magic. There's something wrong with their auras." Harry observed the creatures with newfound concern. Unlike the energetic, emotional Mimsy, these elves seemed barely present, going through the motions of service without any personality or will. "Do you think he's hurting them?" Harry whispered to his father. James's expression darkened. "I don't know, son. But it's another reason not to overstay our welcome." Blackthorne himself was absent from the meal, a small mercy that allowed them to speak more freely. Remus updated them on what he discovered during his early morning exploration of the library. "The place is a necromancer's treasure trove," he reported, keeping his voice low. "Books that haven't been seen outside the Department of Mysteries for centuries. Notes on experiments that would turn even the most hardened unspeakable's stomach. Anything that might help us?" James asked. Remus hesitated. "Possibly. I found references to a ritual that might stabilize your condition, make your return more permanent without requiring constant proximity to Harry. But..." He glanced at Harry, clearly reluctant to continue in his presence. "But it requires sacrifice," Peter finished in a whisper. "Doesn't it? That's always the price with death magic." "We're not sacrificing anything or anyone," James stated firmly. "We'll find another way." Harry pushed his pancakes around his plate, appetite diminishing. "What if there isn't another way?" he asked quietly. "What if the only way to keep you here is—" "No," James interrupted, placing his hand over Harry's smaller one. "That's not an option, Harry. I didn't die protecting you only to let you sacrifice yourself or anyone else to bring me back. That's not how this works." "Your father's right, pup," Sirius added gently. "If the choice is between us returning beyond the veil or something happening to you, that's no choice at all." Harry felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. The thought of losing them again, of returning to the loneliness he'd known at the Dursleys, was unbearable. But he nodded, trying to be brave for his father's sake. "Now," James said, forcing cheer into his voice, "finish your breakfast. You'll need your strength for whatever Blackthorn has planned." An hour later, Harry and James followed a silent house elf through the mansion's winding corridors. Remus accompanied them, his amber eyes alert for any signs of danger. The eastern study, when they reached it, was unlike the rest of the house. Where most rooms were shrouded in perpetual twilight, this space was bright, illuminated by enchanted windows that showed a sunny meadow that couldn't possibly exist outside the actual walls. Blackthorn awaited them, standing before a large circular table engraved with symbols Harry recognized from the veil between. Various objects were arranged carefully on the table: a white candle, a small silver bell, a bowl of clear water, and what appeared to be a pile of small bones. "Ah, right on time," Blackthorn greeted them. His eyes narrowed slightly at Remus's presence. "I was expecting one chaperone, not two." "Consider it academic interest," Remus replied mildly. "I've always been fascinated by rare magical disciplines." Blackthorn's expression suggested he didn't believe this for a moment, but he didn't object further. "Very well. Please, take seats along the wall. I must ask you not to interfere, regardless of what you may see or hear. Death magic is precise, and interruptions can have unfortunate consequences." James and Remus exchanged glances but complied, settling into chairs positioned against the far wall. Harry noticed his father gripping his wand tightly, ready to intervene at the first sign of danger. "Now then, young Potter," Blackthorn began, gesturing Harry to the table. "Today we will begin with the fundamentals. Before you can control your gift, you must first understand it." Harry approached cautiously, eyeing the bones with apprehension. "What are those?" "Mice," Blackthorn replied matter-of-factly. "Ethically sourced, I assure you. They died of natural causes." Somehow, Harry doubted that, but he said nothing. "Death magic," Blackthorn continued, "is neither inherently dark nor light. It simply is, as natural as the cycle of seasons, as inevitable as time itself. What makes it feared is not its nature, but its power. Few forces in magic are as primal or as potent." He gestured to the items on the table. "Water represents the flow of life. Fire," he indicated the candle, "represents the spark of consciousness. The bell signifies the moment of transition from living to dead. And these," he gently touched the small bones, "represent the physical vessel left behind." Despite his unease, Harry found himself drawn into the lesson. Blackthorn might be unsettling, but his knowledge was evident, and his teaching style was surprisingly clear. "Your gift is unusual," the necromancer continued. "Most practitioners of death magic must study for decades to achieve even a fraction of what you accomplished on Samhain. You have an innate connection to the realm beyond the veil, perhaps due to your unique history." "You mean surviving the killing curse?" Harry asked. Blackthorn's eyes gleamed. "Precisely. You have been touched by death and returned. Such an experience leaves its mark on more than just your forehead, young Potter." He lit the candle with a gesture, its flame burning an unnatural blue. "Today, we will simply attune your senses. Close your eyes and feel the boundary between life and death around you." Harry glanced at his father, who gave him a tense nod of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, Harry closed his eyes. At first, he felt nothing but the cool air of the study and heard nothing but the soft breathing of the room's occupants. Then, gradually, he became aware of something else, a subtle current flowing around and through everything, like water beneath ice. "Yes," Blackthorn murmured, his voice seeming to come from very far away. "You feel it, don't you? The current of life, and beyond it, the vast ocean of death." Harry did feel it. The sensation was both familiar and alien, like recognizing a place visited only in dreams. He could sense the vibrant, steady flows of life from his father and Remus, but they were different. Their energies were tethered to something within Harry himself, fine threads of connection stretching between them. And Blackthorn. Harry's awareness recoiled instinctively. The necromancer's life force was wrong, fragmented, patched together, sustained by something dark and hungry that pulsed at his core. "Fascinating," Blackthorn whispered. "You see far more than I expected for a first lesson. Now, direct your awareness to the bones before you. Feel what once was there, and is now gone." Harry extended his magical senses toward the mouse bones. They felt empty, hollow, vessels abandoned by their animating spark. Yet as he focused, he began to perceive faint echoes, like the afterimage left when looking away from a bright light. "The imprint remains," Blackthorn instructed. "Life leaves its signature even after departure. Necromancy is the art of reading that signature, and when necessary, calling it back." Harry felt a sudden chill as something shifted in the magical atmosphere of the room. The blue candle flame flickered wildly, and the water in the bowl began to ripple without any physical disturbance. "What's happening?" James asked sharply from his position against the wall. "Your son's magic is responding to the lesson," Blackthorn replied, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Quite impressively, I might add." Harry opened his eyes to find the mouse bones hovering an inch above the table, trembling slightly as if struggling to reassemble themselves. The sight sent a jolt of alarm through him, breaking his concentration. The bones clattered back to the table as the strange atmosphere dissipated. "I didn't mean to do that," Harry said, backing away from the table. "Of course you did," Blackthorn contradicted. "Your conscious mind may not have formed the intention, but your magic recognized its affinity for this work." He studied Harry with renewed interest. "You have remarkable potential, young Potter. With proper training, you could." "I think that's enough for today," James interrupted, standing abruptly. "Harry looks tired." Indeed, Harry suddenly realized he was exhausted. The exercise had drained him more than he'd noticed while engaged in it. His limbs felt heavy, and a dull headache pulsed behind his eyes. Blackthorn looked as though he wanted to object but ultimately nodded. "Very well. Rest is important after working with death magic. The energies involved can be taxing on a developing magical core." He fixed Harry with those unsettling eyes. "Tomorrow, we will attempt something more practical." The way he said "practical" sent a shiver down Harry's spine. Back in Harry's assigned bedroom, James paced restlessly while Remus sat beside Harry on the edge of the bed. "I don't like this," James stated flatly. "The way he looks at Harry, it's like he's cataloging components for a potion." "I agree," Remus said grimly. But we did learn something valuable today. Harry's connection to you three is visible on the magical level, threads of energy anchoring you to this plane through him. Harry nodded, remembering the strange tethers he'd sensed. I could feel them. Like golden strings connecting us. And Blackthorn? Remus asked carefully. What did you sense about him? Harry hesitated, trying to find words for the wrongness he'd perceived. He's broken. Like a puzzle put back together with pieces missing, and something else stuffed in the gaps. He shuddered at the memory. Something hungry. James and Remus exchanged alarmed glances. That confirms my suspicions, Remus said quietly. The books I found in his library, several described techniques for extending life by consuming the energy of others. Not quite like Voldemort's rumored methods, but similar in principle. You think he's been keeping himself alive by feeding on people? James looked ill at the thought. Not exactly people, came Sirius's voice from the doorway. He entered with Peter trailing behind him, both looking grim. We found his workshop in the West Wing. You don't want to know what's in there. But I'd bet my wand he's been harvesting magical creatures for their life force. We need to leave, James decided instantly. Tonight. How? Peter asked nervously. We've searched the entire ground floor. There are no conventional exits, no doors leading outside, no usable fireplaces. It's as if the mansion exists in a pocket dimension. The bell, Harry suggested. The one he used to bring us here. Could we use it to go somewhere else? Remus shook his head. It's keyed to Blackthorn's magic. I doubt it would respond to any of us. Then we'll have to make our own exit, James said determinedly. The mansion must have defenses against conventional magical transportation, but they might not account for our unique condition. What are you suggesting? Sirius asked. James turned to Harry. You created a connection between us, a tether from death to life. What if we could use that connection in reverse? Pull you along our path instead of us following yours. A reverse summoning, Remus mused, understanding dawning. It might work, especially given Harry's natural affinity for death magic. But where would we go? Peter asked. The Ministry is still looking for us. Potter Cottage, James decided. It's still under family wards, and the Ministry has already searched it. It's the last place they'd expect us to return to. We'll need a distraction, Sirius pointed out. Blackthorn will sense any major magical working in the mansion. Leave that to me, Remus said with uncharacteristic grimness. I found some rather unstable alchemical compounds in his laboratory that could create quite the commotion if mishandled. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Under the guise of resting from his lesson, Harry remained in his room while the Marauders made ready for their escape. By nightfall, the plan was set. They would act at midnight, when the barriers between life and death were traditionally thinnest. As the witching hour approached, Harry sat cross-legged on his bed, the Marauders gathered around him in a circle. James placed a small silver object in Harry's palm, his old pocket watch, retrieved from the veil between before they'd left Privet Drive. This was my father's, and his father's before him, James explained softly. It's connected to Potter Cottage by generations of family magic. Focus on it, Harry. Feel the connection. Harry closed his fingers around the watch, which felt warm despite the room's chill. He closed his eyes, reaching for that sense of magical awareness Blackthorn had helped him discover earlier. The tethers connecting him to the four men glowed golden in his mind's eye, his father's the strongest, a brilliant cord of light and love, Sirius's nearly as powerful, vibrant and protective, Remus's steady and warm, Peter's thin and wavering, but present nonetheless. I can feel you all, Harry whispered. The connections. Good, James murmured. Now, feel the watch. It's part of our family's magic, part of our home. Harry focused on the silver object in his hand. Gradually, he became aware of another connection, fainter, more distant, but unmistakable. A thread of belonging stretching out beyond the confines of Blackthorn's mansion. "I feel it," he confirmed. "It's pulling." A distant boom shook the mansion, followed by the sound of shattering glass and alarmed shouting. Remus's distraction was underway. "Now," James instructed. "Harry, hold tight to that connection. Everyone, focus on Potter Cottage. We're going to pull Harry through the veil with us, just for an instant, then back to the physical world at the cottage." Harry gripped the watch tightly, concentrating on the distant thread of connection with all his might. The Marauders joined hands, forming a circle around him, their eyes closed in concentration. The room began to darken, shadows gathering despite the lit lamps. Harry felt a strange tugging sensation, as if his very being was being stretched in multiple directions. The air grew cold enough that his breath fogged before him. "Portus Mortis," James intoned, his voice eerily resonant in the darkened room. The world dissolved around them. For a brief, terrifying moment, Harry felt as if he were falling through an endless void, with only the golden tethers connecting him to the Marauders preventing him from plummeting into oblivion. Voices whispered around him, countless souls reaching, calling his name with increasing urgency. Then, just as suddenly, solid ground materialized beneath him. Harry gasped, opening his eyes to find himself sprawled on the familiar stone floor of Potter Cottage. The Marauders similarly collapsed around him. "It worked," Sirius croaked, looking simultaneously thrilled and nauseated. "Bloody hell, it actually worked." "Language," James muttered automatically, though he looked equally stunned by their success. He crawled to Harry's side, checking him for injuries. "Are you all right, son?" Harry nodded, though he felt strangely hollow, as if something essential had been temporarily scooped out of him and not quite replaced properly. "Just tired. Really tired." "Not surprising," Remus observed, struggling to his feet. "What we just did was essentially improvised necromancy using Harry as both focus and passenger. The magical drain must be significant." "Master Harry." "Master James." Mimsie's joyful cry preceded the house elf's appearance as she popped into existence beside them. "You is returning." Mimsie was so worried when the ministry wizards came searching. "Hello, Mimsie," James greeted her warmly. "Sorry to drop in unannounced. We had to make a rather hasty exit from our previous accommodation." "The nasty death wizard's house," Mimsie said, nodding knowingly. "Mimsie can smell his magic on you. Very bad wizard, very dark powers." She wrinkled her nose in disgust. "Mimsie will prepare baths with purifying herbs for all." "That would be wonderful," Remus said gratefully. "But first, can you tell us, has anyone else been here since the ministry's search?" Mimsie shook her head. "No wizards has returned. Mimsie has been keeping watch and strengthening the old wards as best she can." "Good," James said, relief evident in his voice. "We should be safe here, at least for now." Harry desperately wanted to ask more questions, to understand exactly what had happened during their escape, but exhaustion was rapidly overtaking him. His eyelids felt like lead weights, and the world seemed to be gently spinning around him. "Someone needs sleep," Sirius observed, noticing Harry's drooping head. "We all do," James agreed. "It's been a long day." The next thing Harry knew, he was being gently tucked into bed in what he recognized as one of the cottage's bedrooms. His father's face hovered above him, concerned but smiling. "Rest now," James murmured, brushing Harry's hair back from his forehead. "We're home, Harry. We're safe." As sleep claimed him, Harry thought he heard his father add softly, "And I'm going to make sure it stays that way." The following days passed in a blur of activity as Potter Cottage transformed from a dusty, long-abandoned property into a true home. Mimsie was ecstatic to have a Potter in residence again, especially the heir, and threw herself into household management with boundless enthusiasm. Under her direction, rooms were cleaned and updated, furnishings repaired, and the pantry stocked with food both preserved and fresh from the cottage's long-neglected garden, which the house elf immediately set about rehabilitating. More importantly, the Marauders worked tirelessly to reinforce the cottage's protections. James, drawing on generations of Potter family magic, strengthened the blood wards. Sirius, whose family background had given him unfortunate but useful knowledge of defensive magic, added layers of detection and aversion charms. Remus researched and implemented obscure protective enchantments designed to confuse and misdirect anyone searching for them. Even Peter made himself useful, drawing on his experience hiding from both sides during the war to suggest additional precautions. Though the others still regarded him with varying degrees of hostility, they couldn't deny his insights were valuable. For Harry, it was a time of discovery and growing bonds. Each day brought new knowledge about the magical world, his family history, and his own developing abilities. This, James explained one morning, unrolling a large tapestry across the cottage's main room, is the Potter family tree. It goes back nearly 1,000 years, to Linfred of Stinchcombe, known as the Potterer, which is where our family name comes from. Harry traced the golden threads connecting generations of Potters, marveling at the sense of belonging it gave him. Names and dates, marriages and births, all leading down to his own name embroidered in fresh, bright thread at the bottom of the tapestry. "Your mother should be here too," James said softly, his finger hovering over the space beside his own name. "The tapestry updates automatically for births and marriages, but..." He trailed off, his expression pained. "Because you're not fully alive," Harry finished the thought. The magic of the tapestry couldn't quite recognize James's current state, neither truly living nor properly dead. "Right," James confirmed, forcing a smile. "Just one more thing to fix once we figure out our situation." These moments of sadness were balanced by times of surprising joy. Sirius took it upon himself to introduce Harry to the finer points of magical childhood, conjuring toy brooms and enchanted figurines that enacted famous Quidditch plays. "Your father was a brilliant chaser," Sirius informed Harry as they sat on the cliff's edge one breezy afternoon, watching a miniature Quidditch match play out before them. "Could have gone professional if he hadn't decided to become an Auror, a magical law enforcement officer," he clarified, seeing Harry's confusion. "What about my mum?" Harry asked. "Did she play Quidditch too?" Sirius chuckled. "Lily? Merlin, no. She hated flying, one of the few things she wasn't naturally brilliant at. Used to drive your father mad during our Hogwarts days. Here he was, Quidditch star, and the girl he fancied couldn't care less about his athletic prowess. How did they get together then?" Harry asked, fascinated by these glimpses into his parents' lives. "Ah, now that's a story." Sirius leaned back on his elbows, grinning at the memory. "Your dad spent years making a complete prat of himself trying to impress her. It wasn't until 7th year, when he finally deflated his head a bit and showed her who he really was underneath all the showing off, that she gave him a chance. And they fell in love." "Like a ton of bricks," Sirius confirmed. Once Lily Evans decided James Potter was worth her time, that was it. They were inseparable. Never seen two people more perfectly matched. She kept his feet on the ground, and he taught her to reach for the stars. Harry soaked up these stories like a sponge, building a mental image of the mother he couldn't remember and deepening his understanding of his father. In the evenings, James would often continue these tales, sharing photographs he'd discovered in old albums stored in the cottage. "This was our wedding day," he said one night, pointing to a moving photograph of himself and a beautiful red-haired woman in white robes, both radiating happiness as they danced under an enchanted canopy of flowers. "Your mother insisted on incorporating both magical and Muggle traditions. Said she wouldn't let either world define her completely." Harry stared at his mother's face, her bright green eyes so like his own, her smile luminous as she gazed up at James. "She was beautiful." "She was extraordinary," James corrected gently. "Beautiful, yes, but so much more. Brilliant, fierce, compassionate, and stubborn as a hippogriff when she believed in something." He smiled fondly at the memory. Which was often. Not all of Harry's education was focused on family history. Remus, ever the teacher, took charge of beginning Harry's magical education, focusing on theory and history that would provide a foundation for when he eventually attended Hogwarts. Magic isn't just about waving wands and saying incantations, Remus explained during one of their daily lessons in the cottage's small study. It's about understanding the underlying principles, why spells work the way they do, how magical forces interact, the responsibilities that come with such power. Harry proved an eager and capable student, absorbing knowledge with a quickness that impressed even Remus. His aptitude for magical theory seemed to transcend his young age, as if his mind had been waiting for these concepts to fill gaps he hadn't known existed. But it was his continuing necromantic development that most concerned the Marauders. Despite leaving Blackthorn's tutelage behind, Harry's abilities continued to manifest in ways that were sometimes alarming. The first major incident occurred about 2 weeks after their escape from Raven's Hollow. Harry was exploring the cottage grounds, having been given permission to play outside as long as he remained within the property's wards. He discovered a small family graveyard nestled in a sheltered hollow behind the cottage, the final resting place of several generations of Potters. Curious, Harry wandered among the headstones, reading the inscriptions of ancestors he'd seen on the family tapestry. As he reached the oldest section, something strange happened. The air around him grew noticeably colder, and a faint shimmer appeared above the graves, indistinct at first, then gradually solidifying into the forms of men and women in clothing from various historical periods. Unlike the ghosts Harry had glimpsed before, these spirits seemed more substantial, more present. They turned to look at him with expressions of curiosity and wonder. "The heir returns," one elderly man said, his voice surprisingly clear. "And he carries the gift." "Linfred's blood runs true," agreed a woman in medieval dress. "Death's door stands open in him." Harry stood frozen, equal parts fascinated and terrified. These weren't like the repetitive echoes he'd seen in Blackthorn's mansion or the smuggler's cellar. These spirits were fully conscious, aware of him and their surroundings. "Who are you?" he managed to ask. "Your family, child," the elderly man replied. "I am Ralston Potter, member of the Wisengamot in my time. These are your ancestors, drawn to your presence because of your gift." "My gift?" "The sight," explained a young woman with Harry's own unruly black hair. "The ability to see beyond the veil. Some in each generation of Potters inherit a touch of it, but rarely so strong as yours." Harry looked from one spectral face to another, realizing with a jolt that he was having a conversation with his dead relatives. Actual, coherent dialogue, not just glimpses or impressions. Somehow, his proximity was allowing them to manifest more fully than spirits normally could. "Does this mean I'm necromancer?" he asked hesitantly. The spirits exchanged glances. "Not in the way you fear," Ralston Potter answered. "True necromancy is the forcing of death against its will, the binding and controlling of souls for selfish purpose. What you have is different. You stand in the doorway between worlds, allowing passage rather than forcing it." Before Harry could ask more questions, he heard Sirius calling his name from the direction of the cottage. The spirits began to fade. "We cannot remain," the medieval woman said regretfully. "It takes too much energy, even with your gift supporting us. But know this, heir of Potter, you are not alone in walking between worlds. Seek the journals of Thaddeus Potter in the cottage's hidden library. He too bore this gift." By the time Sirius crested the hill, the spirits had vanished entirely. He found Harry standing alone among the gravestones, a thoughtful expression on his young face. "There you are," Sirius said, relief evident in his voice. "You've been gone nearly an hour. Your dad was getting worried." "Sorry," Harry apologized. "I lost track of time." "Sirius, do you know anything about a hidden library in the cottage? Or someone called Thaddeus Potter?" Sirius's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Thaddeus Potter? That's a name I haven't heard since History of Magic class. He was a bit of a controversial figure in wizarding history, a Potter who studied death magic back in the 1700s, I think." Not exactly featured prominently in the family histories. He gave Harry a curious look. Why do you ask? I just saw his name on one of the graves, Harry lied, not quite ready to explain his ghostly encounter. And I was curious. Sirius seemed to accept this explanation, though his expression remained thoughtful as they walked back to the cottage together. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Harry slipped out of his room and made his way to the cottage's main sitting room. If there was a hidden library, perhaps he could find it on his own. The cottage was quiet save for the soft crackling of the banked fire in the hearth. Moonlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Harry stood in the center of the room, trying to sense any magical concealments as Remus had been teaching him to do. Looking for something, pup, came Sirius's voice from the doorway. Harry started guiltily. I couldn't sleep. Sirius entered the room fully, his expression knowing but not angry. And that led you to prowl around the cottage in the middle of the night because... Harry hesitated, then decided on honesty. I was looking for the hidden library. The one with Thaddeus Potter's journals. Ah. Sirius studied him for a long moment. And how exactly did you know there was a hidden library? I'm quite sure none of us mentioned it. I saw them, Harry admitted quietly. My ancestors. In the graveyard today. They spoke to me. To Harry's surprise, Sirius didn't look shocked or disbelieving. Instead, he sighed and ran a hand through his long hair. I thought something like that might have happened. You had that look, the one your mother used to get when she discovered something significant but wasn't ready to share it. He crossed to the large stone fireplace and pressed his hand against a particular stone in the mantelpiece. Your father and Remus wanted to wait until you were older before showing you this, but... He shrugged. I've always believed in learning by doing. The entire fireplace swung silently inward, revealing a circular room lined with bookshelves from floor to ceiling. A small reading table occupied the center, a single chair tucked beneath it. The Potter Private Library, Sirius announced. Where the family has kept its more sensitive knowledge for generations. Harry stepped forward in wonder, his eyes wide as he took in hundreds of leather-bound volumes, scrolls, and what appeared to be journals stacked neatly on the shelves. This is brilliant, he breathed. It's also not for casual browsing, Sirius cautioned. Some of these books contain magic that could be dangerous if mishandled. He moved to a particular section and retrieved a small, worn journal bound in faded blue leather. This, however, might be what your ghostly relatives were referring to. The personal journal of Thaddeus Potter, dated 1743 to 1762. Harry accepted the book reverently. Will Dad be angry that you showed me? Sirius considered this. Not angry, exactly. Concerned, probably. But I think he needs to accept that your abilities are developing whether we shield you from knowledge or not. Better you learn from family records than from people like Blackthorn. Harry nodded solemnly. I'll be careful with it. I just want to understand what's happening to me. Sirius ruffled Harry's hair affectionately. I know, pup. Just remember, whatever you read in there, whatever you discover about your abilities, you're still Harry. Still the son James and Lily would be proud of. Even though I brought back the person who betrayed them? Harry asked, voicing the question that had been bothering him since learning Peter's role in his parents' deaths. Sirius's expression darkened momentarily before softening into something more complex. That's something I'm still working through myself, he admitted. But I believe your magic brought back all 4 Marauders for a reason. Even Wormtail. He guided Harry back out of the secret library, sealing it behind them. Now, back to bed with you. You can start reading that tomorrow, with your father's knowledge and permission. Harry clutched the journal to his chest, grateful for Sirius's understanding and trust. As they walked back toward the bedrooms, he felt a surge of affection for his godfather, this man who balanced respect for Harry's curiosity with appropriate adult guidance. Sirius, he asked as they reached his bedroom door. Do you think my abilities are dark? Sirius crouched down to Harry's level, his grey eyes serious in the dim hallway. I think magic itself isn't dark or light, Harry. It's how we use it, and why, that matters. Your mother used to say that intent is the soul of magic, that the same spell cast with love versus cast with hate becomes an entirely different thing. He placed a gentle hand on Harry's shoulder. Your intent has always been pure. You wanted your family. You wanted love. There's nothing dark about that. Harry nodded, comforted by these words. Good night, Sirius. Good night, pup. Sweet dreams. The following morning, Harry confessed his midnight adventure to James, presenting Thaddeus Potter's journal with a mixture of apprehension and determination. To his relief, his father wasn't angry, though he did give Sirius a long, exasperated look that promised future discussion. I suppose it was inevitable, James sighed. You have your mother's curiosity and my disregard for rules. A terrifying combination. But his smile took any sting from the words. We'll read it together, Harry. That way, if you have questions or concerns, I'll be right there. Over the next few days, father and son explored Thaddeus's writings together. The journal detailed the experiences of a young wizard coming to terms with his unusual affinity for death magic, his fears, his discoveries, his eventual acceptance of his gifts as a natural, if rare, magical variation rather than something to be feared or reviled. He was like me, Harry realized as they read an entry describing Thaddeus's first conscious communication with spirits. He could see them too. It seems so, James agreed, his initial reservations giving way to scholarly interest. According to this, the ability has appeared sporadically in the Potter line for generations, usually in those with particularly strong magical cores. For Harry, the journal was revelatory. Here was evidence that his abilities weren't unique or unnatural, that others had walked this path before him and lived fulfilling, positive lives despite, or even because of, their unusual magical affinity. As Harry's understanding grew, so did his control. He learned to modulate his death sense, to open or close his awareness to spirits around him rather than being constantly bombarded by their presence. He practiced focusing his ability to allow specific spirits to manifest more clearly while keeping others at bay. The ancestral Potters in the graveyard became regular, if limited, conversational partners. They offered historical perspective, magical knowledge, and a sense of continuity that helped anchor Harry's developing identity as both a Potter and a wizard with rare abilities. Meanwhile, Remus continued his research into the Marauders' unique condition, spending long hours in the hidden library and occasionally making discreet trips to magical bookshops in obscure corners of Europe, disguised by powerful glamour charms. The good news, he reported one evening in late November, is that your magical connection to us seems to be stabilizing. We can now move up to a mile from you without experiencing the stretching sensation we felt initially. And the bad news? James prompted, recognizing Remus's tone. The bad news is that we're still fundamentally tied to Harry's life force. If anything were to happen to him. He trailed off, the implication clear. Nothing is going to happen to Harry, Sirius stated flatly. Not while we're around. Peter, who had been keeping to himself as much as possible, cleared his throat nervously. There's something else we need to consider, he said, his voice hesitant. Rumors are spreading. In certain circles. 4 pairs of eyes turned to him with varying degrees of suspicion and interest. What circles would those be, Wormtail? Sirius asked coldly. Still maintaining your Death Eater contacts. Peter flinched but continued. I've been listening to wizarding radio broadcasts. Reading discarded Daily Prophets when I can. There are whispers about unusual magical activity in Surrey. About a child with extraordinary power. Some are even suggesting that James Potter may have returned from the dead. James frowned deeply. How? We've been careful. The ministry's investigation found nothing definitive. Blackthorn, Harry suggested. Could he have spread the rumors? Possibly, Remus acknowledged. Though it doesn't seem his style. He values secrecy too much. It doesn't matter how the rumors started, Peter insisted, an uncharacteristic urgency in his voice. What matters is who's listening to them. There are still Death Eaters at large, ones who were never caught or identified. Ones who would give anything to curry favor with the Dark Lord by eliminating his prophesied nemesis. Voldemort is gone, James stated firmly, though Harry noticed a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Is he? Peter whispered, his watery eyes darting nervously to Harry's scar. You know what Dumbledore believes, that he's weakened but not truly defeated. And his followers, they're watching, waiting for any sign of his return. An uncomfortable silence fell over the cottage's main room. Finally, Sirius spoke, his voice hard with suppressed anger. And you would know all about his followers, wouldn't you, Peter? Peter shrank back in his chair. I'm trying to help, he said miserably. I know you don't trust me, you shouldn't trust me, but I don't want Harry hurt. I never wanted Lily and James hurt. Yet you betrayed them anyway, Sirius growled. Stop, Harry interrupted, surprising everyone. Fighting doesn't help anything. If Death Eaters might be looking for us, we need to be prepared. James looked at his son with a mixture of pride and sadness, pride at his maturity, sadness that a 6-year-old should have to think about such dangers at all. Harry's right, he conceded. We strengthen the wards again. We implement the emergency protocols we developed. And we contact Dumbledore. He should know if there's increased Death Eater activity. The others nodded in agreement, their expressions solemn. The peaceful routine they'd established at the cottage suddenly felt fragile, threatened by the outside world that had momentarily receded from their awareness. Harry watched the adults mobilize with efficiency born of their previous war experience. James and Sirius immediately began reviewing and reinforcing the property's defensive enchantments. Remus gathered emergency supplies and established contingency plans for rapid evacuation if necessary. Even Peter made himself useful, creating magical early warning systems that would alert them to any approach, magical or mundane. That night, as Harry prepared for bed, James sat beside him, his expression serious but gentle. I want you to know something, Harry, he said, taking his son's small hand in his own. No matter what happens, whether these rumors amount to anything or not, protecting you is our first priority. Not just because your magic sustains us, but because you're my son. You're what matters most. Harry nodded, swallowing against a sudden lump in his throat. I know, Dad. But I don't want anything to happen to you either. Not again. James pulled him into a tight embrace. We're Potters, he said softly. We face trouble together. Always have, always will. As Harry drifted off to sleep that night, he tried to hold on to his father's reassurance. But his dreams were troubled, shadowed figures moving through darkness, whispered conversations he couldn't quite hear, and beneath it all, a growing sense of something approaching. Something that had been set in motion the moment he'd opened the veil between and could not now be stopped. The attack came 3 days later. It began with a subtle shift in the cottage's wards, a gentle pressure that might have gone unnoticed if not for Peter's early warning charms, which set off a soft, persistent chiming throughout the cottage. Harry was in the hidden library with Remus, practicing controlled manifestation of ancestral spirits, when the alarm sounded. Remus immediately extinguished the candles they'd been using for the exercise and sealed the secret entrance. Stay here, he instructed Harry, his normally gentle voice sharp with urgency. Don't come out until one of us comes for you with the password. What's happening? Harry asked, though he already suspected the answer. Someone's testing the wards, Remus confirmed, drawing his wand. Remember, no matter what you hear, stay hidden unless you hear mischief managed. Understood? Harry nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. Mischief managed. Got it. With a final reassuring squeeze of Harry's shoulder, Remus slipped out of the hidden library, the entrance sealing seamlessly behind him. Harry was left alone in the darkness, the only illumination coming from the faint glow of preservation charms on the oldest books. He could hear muffled voices from beyond the hidden room, James and Sirius issuing rapid instructions, Mimsy's higher tones responding with determined efficiency, Peter's nervous questions. Then silence, which was somehow worse. Harry sat in the darkness, straining his ears for any sound that might indicate what was happening outside. Minutes stretched like hours. He considered using his death sense to try to perceive what was occurring, but hesitated. Would the use of such magic draw attention from whoever was attacking the cottage? Suddenly, the entire building shook with a concussive force that made dust rain down from the library ceiling. The attack had begun in earnest. Outside the hidden library, chaos erupted. Spellfire illuminated the cottage windows in strobing flashes of red, green, and purple. Shouts and incantations pierced the night air as the Marauders defended their sanctuary against unseen assailants. James Potter stood in the cottage's main doorway, his conjured wand slashing through complex defensive patterns that turned aside curses and hexes with remarkable efficiency. Despite his not-quite-living state and its effect on his magic, years of Auror training and combat experience made him a formidable opponent. Protego Maxima. He bellowed, erecting a powerful shield just as a sickly yellow curse impacted it. The shield held, but James felt the strain in his magical core, a reminder of his tenuous connection to the physical world. Beside him, Sirius dueled with trademark ferocity, his style more aggressive than defensive. "There's at least 6 of them," he called to James between rapid-fire counter-curses. "Spread out along the perimeter. Trying to find weak points in the wards. They're using standard Ministry assault formation," Remus observed from his position at a side window, where he methodically picked off attackers with precisely aimed stunning spells. "These aren't random Death Eaters, they're trained. Probably former Aurors who secretly supported Voldemort," James suggested grimly. There were always rumors about sympathizers in the department. A tremendous crash from the back of the cottage momentarily distracted them. Peter's voice called out in alarm, "They've breached the kitchen wards." "Damn it!" Sirius snarled. "I'll handle it." He broke off from the front defense, racing through the cottage toward the new threat. James continued holding the main entrance, but he could feel his strength beginning to wane. Whatever connection tethered him to the living world through Harry's magic was being tested by the prolonged magical combat. "We can't keep this up indefinitely," he called to Remus. "We need to get Harry and evacuate." Before Remus could respond, a new voice joined the fray, cold, aristocratic, and chillingly familiar. "Potter. We know you have the boy. Surrender him, and you may return to your graves with dignity." "Malfoy," James spat, recognizing Lucius Malfoy's distinctive drawl. "Should have known you'd slither out from whatever rock you've been hiding under." "The rumors were true, then," Malfoy's voice replied, closer now. "The great James Potter, returned from death itself. How unnatural." A barrage of especially vicious curses accompanied these words, forcing James to pour more power into his shields. He could feel himself becoming less substantial with each spell he cast, his hands occasionally turning translucent before solidifying again. Inside the hidden library, Harry pressed his ear against the wall, trying to make sense of the muffled battle sounds. The cottage shook again with another impact, books tumbling from shelves around him. One heavy tome landed at his feet, falling open to a page marked with what appeared to be a family crest, a triangle containing a circle bisected by a line. Harry stared at the symbol, feeling a strange resonance with it. Without thinking, he reached down to touch the page. The moment his fingers made contact with the parchment, a jolt of something like recognition shot through him. The air in the library grew noticeably colder, and Harry felt that now familiar pressure building in his chest, the doorway in his magic opening wider. Outside, the battle was turning against the Marauders. Despite their skill and determination, their magical limitations were becoming increasingly apparent. James's shield faltered under a particularly powerful blasting curse, forcing him to dive aside as the cottage's front door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Sirius had managed to subdue 2 attackers in the kitchen but was now pinned down by crossfire from the remaining assailants. Remus had taken a cutting curse to his shoulder, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side as he continued to cast with his right. Peter had disappeared entirely, whether fled or fallen wasn't clear. "Find the boy," Malfoy ordered his compatriots. "He must be hidden somewhere inside." James struggled to his feet, his form flickering like a faulty projection. "You'll never touch my son," he declared, his voice strong even as his body betrayed his weakening state. Malfoy stepped through the shattered doorway, his pale features visible beneath his hood. His cold gray eyes widened slightly at James's semi-transparent appearance. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Not quite alive, are you, Potter? What dark magic has your son been practicing to achieve such an abomination?" "Wouldn't you like to know?" James retorted, raising his wand despite the tremor in his hand. Malfoy's thin lips curved in a cruel smile. "I would, actually. The Dark Lord would find such knowledge valuable. When he returns." "He's not coming back," James stated firmly. "And neither are you, once I'm done with you." He cast a powerful blasting curse of his own, but his weakened state made the spell less effective than it should have been. Malfoy deflected it easily, responding with a barrage of dark magic that forced James back step by step. In the hidden library, Harry felt the battle turning. Though he couldn't see what was happening, his developing senses could perceive the Marauders' life forces weakening, stretched too thin by prolonged magical combat. Without conscious decision, he placed both hands on the open book before him, the strange symbol seeming to pulse beneath his fingers. "Help them," he whispered, not knowing who he was addressing or what he was asking for. "Please, help my family." The air around him swirled with sudden energy. The symbol on the page began to glow with an ethereal light, and Harry felt a surge of power flowing through him, not from within, but from somewhere beyond, as if something vast was answering his call. Outside, one of Malfoy's companions had discovered the entrance to the hidden library and was systematically testing the wall for magical concealment. "There's something here," the hooded figure called. "A hidden room of some kind." Malfoy smiled triumphantly. "Excellent. Break it open." "No." James shouted, trying to reach the fireplace but finding himself blocked by 2 more Death Eaters. Inside the library, Harry heard the magical probing at the entrance. Fear for his father, for all the Marauders, overwhelmed his earlier caution. The power flowing through him from the symbol surged in response to his emotions. "Protect us," he commanded, his child's voice resonant with something ancient and powerful. The temperature in the cottage plummeted instantly. Frost spread across the floors and walls in crystalline patterns, and the air grew thick with a heavy, oppressive energy that made every movement feel like wading through cold syrup. Outside the cottage, the animals that had been killed in the initial attack, several birds caught in the crossfire, a rabbit struck by a stray curse, even insects crushed underfoot, began to stir. Broken bodies twitched and rose, animated not by returned life but by Harry's instinctive necromantic command. The Death Eater attempting to breach the library entrance suddenly screamed as a swarm of reanimated insects crawled up his legs, burrowing beneath his robes. He staggered back, batting frantically at the undead creatures as they covered him in a writhing mass. In the front room, Malfoy froze in shock as dead birds flew through the shattered doorway, their broken bodies moving with unnatural precision as they targeted his eyes and face. A rabbit, its body crushed and partially destroyed, hopped jerkily toward another Death Eater, leaping with impossible strength to fasten its teeth on the man's throat. "What in Merlin's name?" Malfoy gasped, blasting several birds from the air only to have them reassemble and continue their attack. James, despite his weakened state, couldn't help but stare in amazement at the necromantic display. He had known Harry's abilities were developing, but this was magic on a scale he hadn't thought possible for a child. "Harry," he whispered, understanding that his son must be behind this defensive surge. Fear mingled with pride and concern, pride at Harry's power, concern for what such magic might cost him. The tide of battle turned with supernatural speed. The reanimated creatures, though individually weak, overwhelmed the Death Eaters through sheer numbers and relentlessness. No matter how many times they were destroyed, Harry's magic simply reassembled them, driving them forward with single-minded purpose. "Retreat!" Malfoy ordered, abandoning dignity as he battled his way back through the doorway, his fine robes torn and bloodied from countless small wounds inflicted by dead fauna. "Fall back beyond the anti-apparition wards." The Death Eaters fled in disarray, pursued to the property's boundaries by the macabre army of reanimated creatures. As the last attacker disappeared beyond the ward line with a crack of apparition, the undead animals collapsed like puppets with cut strings, their temporary animation ending as Harry's command was fulfilled. Inside the hidden library, Harry slumped forward across the open book, utterly drained. The strange power that had flowed through him receded, leaving him hollow and exhausted. The symbol on the page stopped glowing, once again just ink on parchment. The entrance to the library swung open to reveal James, his form still flickering but stabilizing as the magical combat ended. He rushed to Harry's side, gathering his son into his arms. "Harry! Are you all right? Talk to me, son." Harry stirred weakly. "Dad? Did it work? Are they gone?" "They're gone," James confirmed, brushing Harry's hair back from his forehead with trembling fingers. "What did you do, Harry? How did you?" "I don't know," Harry admitted, his voice faint. "I just asked for help. And something answered." James looked down at the book Harry had been touching, his eyes widening as he recognized the symbol on the page. "The Deathly Hallows," he murmured. "Of course." Harry tried to ask what that meant, but exhaustion claimed him before the question could form. The last thing he heard before consciousness fled was his father calling for Sirius and Remus, his voice urgent but no longer desperate. "It's over," James was saying. "For now. But they know about Harry now. They all know." Harry woke to soft voices and gentle firelight. He was lying on the sofa in the cottage's main room, a blanket tucked around him, his father seated on the floor beside him. The cottage showed signs of hasty repairs, wooden boards covering broken windows, furniture pushed back into place, scorch marks still visible on some walls. "He's awake," Remus observed from his position by the fireplace, his injured arm now bandaged and in a sling. James turned immediately, relief flooding his features. "Harry. How do you feel?" "Tired," Harry replied honestly. His entire body felt heavy, as if he'd run miles without stopping. "What happened after I passed out?" The adults exchanged glances, clearly debating how much to tell him. It was Sirius who answered, his usual irreverence tempered by genuine concern. "After your rather impressive display of necromantic defense, we secured the cottage as best we could. Mimsy is currently reinforcing the wards with house elf magic, which should buy us some time." "Necromantic defense?" Harry repeated. "You mean the dead animals?" James nodded, his expression complex, pride warring with concern. "You animated everything that had died during the attack. Controlled them with enough precision to drive off 6 trained Death Eaters without killing any of them." "I didn't mean to," Harry said quickly, worried his father might be upset. "It just happened." "We know, son," James assured him, squeezing his hand gently. "No one's blaming you. In fact, you probably saved our lives." "But now they know about me," Harry said, remembering his father's words before he lost consciousness. "The Death Eaters. They know what I can do." "Yes," Remus confirmed gravely. "And it won't take long for word to spread. The Ministry will hear about this within days, if not hours." "Where's Peter?" Harry asked suddenly, noticing the 4th Marauder's absence. Another uncomfortable exchange of glances. "We don't know," James admitted. "He disappeared during the attack. We're hoping he just ran and will return once he feels it's safe, but..." He didn't need to complete the thought. The possibility that Peter had betrayed them again hung heavy in the air. "What happens now?" Harry asked, struggling to sit up. James gently helped him, propping cushions behind his back. "Now we prepare for the inevitable," Sirius said grimly. "The Ministry will come looking. So might Blackthorn, once he hears what you did. We need to be ready to move quickly." "I've sent word to Dumbledore," Remus added. "He should arrive by morning." Harry nodded, trying to process all this through his lingering exhaustion. His gaze fell on the book that had been placed on the coffee table, the one containing the strange symbol that had responded to his plea for help. "Dad? What are the Deathly Hallows?" James looked surprised. "You heard that?" Harry nodded. With a sigh, James picked up the book, opening it to the marked page. "It's an old wizarding legend. 3 powerful magical objects supposedly created by death itself, the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Cloak of Invisibility. Together, they're said to make their owner the Master of Death." "Most consider it just a children's tale," Remus interjected. "From the tales of Beetle the Bard." "But it's not just a story, is it?" Harry asked, sensing there was more. James hesitated before answering. "The Potters have a connection to the legend. We're said to be descendants of Ignotus Peveril, the original owner of the Cloak of Invisibility. In fact..." He glanced at Sirius, who nodded encouragingly. "Our family has passed down an invisibility cloak for generations. It's no ordinary cloak, it's never faded or weakened with time, as normal invisibility cloaks do." "Where is it now?" Harry asked. "I left it with Dumbledore before we went into hiding," James explained. "For safekeeping. I hadn't thought about it in years, to be honest." "And you think, what? That Harry somehow tapped into this Deathly Hallows power?" Sirius asked skeptically. "I don't know," James admitted. "But his reaction to the symbol, combined with his necromantic abilities, it's possible there's a connection." Harry stared at the symbol on the page, feeling that same strange resonance he'd experienced during the attack. "It feels familiar," he said softly. "Like something I should know but can't quite remember." The adults fell silent, contemplating the implications. Finally, Remus spoke up, his practical nature asserting itself. "Regardless of the source of Harry's power, we have more immediate concerns. The Death Eaters will regroup. They'll return with greater numbers and a better strategy. And the Ministry won't be far behind. We need a more secure location," Sirius agreed. "Somewhere neither Death Eaters nor Ministry officials would think to look. We also need allies," James added. "People we can trust who have the resources and influence to help protect Harry." "Dumbledore," Remus began, but James shook his head. "Not just Dumbledore. He has his own agenda, his own responsibilities. We need more." Harry listened to their planning with growing weariness. The brief conversation had drained what little energy he'd recovered. His eyelids grew heavy despite his desire to stay awake and contribute to the discussion. James noticed immediately. "That's enough for tonight," he decided. "Harry needs rest, and so do we all. We'll continue planning in the morning, after Dumbledore arrives." As the others nodded in agreement, James carefully lifted Harry from the sofa. "Let's get you to bed, son. You've done more than enough for one day." Harry didn't protest, allowing himself to be carried to his bedroom. As James tucked him in, he struggled to stay awake long enough to ask one more question. "Dad? Are you afraid of what I can do?" James paused, his expression softening into something infinitely tender. "No, Harry. I'm not afraid of your abilities. I'm concerned about what they might cost you, and about those who might try to use them for their own purposes. But I have never, and will never, fear you." He pressed a gentle kiss to Harry's forehead, right beside the lightning bolt scar. "You're my son, Lily's son. Whatever power you have, whatever destiny awaits you, that never changes. Now sleep. I'll be right here when you wake." As Harry drifted into exhausted slumber, he heard his father quietly add, "Always." Outside the cottage, on a distant cliff overlooking the property, a solitary figure observed the aftermath of the battle. Mortimer Blackthorn's gaunt face was illuminated briefly by wandlight as he examined a small, dead bird, one of many that had fallen after Harry's necromantic control ended. "Extraordinary," he murmured, his sunken eyes gleaming with fascination. Not just animation, but complete control, direction, purpose, coordination. In a child not yet 7 years old. He straightened, his black robes billowing in the night wind. The Hallows respond to him as well. Most interesting. With a last, lingering look at the distant lights of Potter Cottage, Blackthorn turned and disappeared into the darkness. His plans would need adjustment in light of tonight's revelations, but his fundamental goal remained unchanged. Harry Potter would be his ultimate achievement, his key to mastering death itself. And neither resurrected Marauders nor Death Eaters would stand in his way. Chapter 4, The Price of Power. The Wizarding World reacts to news of James and Lily Potter's supposed survival, a cover story crafted by Dumbledore, and Sirius Black's innocence. Harry and the Marauders move to a restored Potter Cottage in Godric's Hollow, but their attempt at normalcy is undermined by several factors. The Marauders discover they need Harry's magical presence to remain stable in the living world, Harry's powers grow increasingly difficult to control, and Mortimer Blackthorn finally locates them, approaching Harry with an offer to teach him to master necromancy. James and Sirius refuse, but Harry is tempted by the promise of understanding his abilities. Remus discovers ancient texts suggesting that resurrections like theirs require a balance. For 4 souls to remain in the living world, others may be pulled toward death. This is confirmed when mysterious deaths begin occurring around Godric's Hollow. The Ministry, led by a suspicious Bartemius Crouch, begins investigating. Peter uses the chaos as an opportunity to escape, fleeing to find remaining Death Eaters. The chapter culminates with Harry, driven by guilt over the deaths and fear of losing his newfound family, attempting a dangerous ritual to permanently anchor the Marauders to the living world. The ritual goes wrong, opening a temporary rift to the land of the dead that allows something malevolent to begin crossing over before James and Sirius can stop the process. Key conflicts: Harry's desire for family versus the natural order, Ministry law versus necromantic reality, the temptation of power versus its consequences. Chapter 5, Between Worlds. The entity that crossed through the rift is revealed to be a Death Hunter, an ancient being that enforces the boundaries between life and death. It begins hunting the resurrected Marauders, determined to restore the natural order. Mortimer Blackthorn returns, offering assistance in exchange for Harry becoming his apprentice. When the Marauders refuse, he reveals his true intentions: to sacrifice Harry's unusual connection to death magic to achieve his own immortality. With enemies on multiple fronts, the Marauders prepare for a final stand. Harry, racked with guilt over causing this situation, secretly meets with Dumbledore, who offers a solution, a ritual that would allow the Marauders to remain in the living world, but at a cost. Harry would need to give up his necromantic abilities forever. As the Death Hunter closes in and Blackthorn prepares to capture Harry, a transformed Peter Pettigrew returns with Death Eaters, creating a 3-way battle at Godric's Hollow. During the chaos, Harry and the Marauders perform Dumbledore's ritual, but with a twist. Harry doesn't give up his power but instead channels it to permanently bind the Marauders to life while offering the Death Hunter another payment: Blackthorn and the Death Eaters who cheated death through dark magic. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.